In Barrhaven, a suburb southwest of Ottawa, Canada's capital, lived Bhupinder Paul Gill and his wife, Jagtar Gill, along with their 3 children. On January 29, 2014, which was their 17th wedding anniversary, it was around noon when Bhupinder Paul set off to the grocery store with his daughter, Harjinder. They planned to buy a cake to celebrate their anniversary and flowers for Jagtar. Jagtar was resting at home because she had just been released from the hospital the day before after undergoing hernia surgery. On that day, Jagtar's other 2 children were at school, while their eldest daughter, Harjinder, had taken a day off from high school to care for her mother. Bhupinder Paul and his daughter arrived home around 1 p.m. While Bhupinder Paul began to unload groceries from the car, Harjinder headed toward the front door. She noticed that it was unlocked, even though they had securely locked it before leaving for the store. Harjinder entered the house and called out. When she received no response, she felt anxious as she walked toward the living room. To her shock, she found her mother lying on the floor. As she approached, she saw blood on her mother's body. Filled with fear, Harjinder screamed, causing Bhupinder Paul to rush inside. Bhupinder Paul was bewildered when he saw his wife lying on the floor. Harjinder ran upstairs to call an ambulance, only to discover that all the phone wires had been cut. Regaining his composure, Bhupinder Paul used his cell phone to call 911. He was crying profusely. The operator, recognizing his distress, told him to remain calm, lay his wife flat, and try to perform CPR. But as soon as he heard this, Bhupinder Paul became silent. Understanding how serious the situation was, the 911 operator promptly sent an ambulance and police to their home. Shortly after, several police cars and an ambulance arrived at Bhupinder Paul's house. Paramedics quickly assessed the situation, confirmed that Jagtar Gill had already passed away, leaving them unable to help. The police, already on the scene, cordoned off the house. Meanwhile, a woman from the neighborhood approached and began looking through the window at the scene. A police officer asked her if she was related to the Gill family. The woman explained that she lived next door and was friends with Jagtar. She had come over after noticing the police and ambulance, worried about what had happened. The officers did not share much information with her but did tell her that Jagtar Gill had died. Upon hearing this, the neighbor left in tears. The forensic team investigating the case confirmed that Jagtar had been attacked with a heavy object and stabbed multiple times across her body. However, no heavy object or knife was discovered near her body. Following this, police detectives advised Gill family to stay elsewhere for a few weeks so that the forensic team could properly secure the crime scene and collect evidence. Later, while searching the house, police officers found a pair of rubber cleaning gloves. Oddly, one of the gloves was missing a finger. The officers also recovered blood-stained knives hidden beneath some dirty dishes in the kitchen sink. Blood spatters were discovered on the living room carpet, the sofa, the stairs leading to the second floor, the upstairs bathroom floor, and even inside the wash basin. Additionally, the police found a 5-kilogram weightlifting rod in the basement, placed on top of a box of Christmas decorations. This rod also had blood stains, prompting the investigator to consider it as crucial evidence. The police did not consider it a robbery because Barrhaven is known to be a safe neighborhood. The doors and locks of the house were intact, and nothing was missing. Jagtar's body still had all her valuable jewelry on. Additionally, the area around Jagtar's house had several new homes being built, which meant that builders and construction companies had set up CCTV cameras to protect their equipment from theft. After examining the CCTV footage, police found no signs of suspicious behavior or concerning individuals. They then spoke with local residents, who provided insights about Jagtar's background. Jagtar moved to Canada in 1994 at 23 years old with her parents and siblings, but the family returned to India in 1997. Later that same year, Jagtar married Bhupinder Paul Gill, who was 20 years old. After their wedding, they came back to Canada and settled in Ottawa. Initially, Jagtar worked at an electronics company, while Bhupinder Paul drove a taxi. To supplement their income, they also delivered pizzas at night and newspapers early in the morning. 2 years after their marriage, they welcomed their first daughter, Harjinder, followed by another daughter and a son. At the time of Jagtar's death, Harjinder was 15, their second daughter, Balwinder, was 10, and their youngest son, Satnam, was 8. Jagtar continued her work at an electronics company, while Bhupinder Pal secured a permanent job as a bus driver with OC Transpo. They worked hard to save money for a new house and eventually bought a home with a double garage in the Barhaven suburb of Ottawa. When their new house was ready, the entire Gill family moved in, including Bhupinder Pal's parents. Jagtar was happy in her new home, but no one could predict the threat that would lead to a tragic murder. On February 20, 2014, many members of the local Sikh community came together at the Gurdwara Sahib in Ottawa to pray for Jagtar's soul. Jagtar Gill had suffered such severe injuries that her family decided to keep the casket closed, allowing only a few individuals to see her face one last time. Meanwhile, the police continued their investigation. Detectives considered the possibility that the killer might be a family member who would try to conceal evidence again. To investigate this theory, the detectives placed a similar weightlifting rod, smeared with fake blood, inside a box of Christmas decorations in the basement and set up a hidden camera nearby. A few days later, the camera captured Bhupinder Pal, just 10 days after Jagtar's death, opening the Christmas box and attempting to conceal the weightlifting rod in his jacket, but it was too large to fit. The next day, Bhupinder Pal returned to the basement and successfully hid a weightlifting bar in his pants. Unbeknownst to him, police officers were watching everything through surveillance cameras. After leaving his house with the bar concealed, officers followed him as he traveled about a kilometer to a nearby wooded area, where he discarded the weightlifting bar in the bushes. Once he was gone, the officers retrieved it. They doubted Bhupinder Pal could be the killer. To verify his alibi, they checked CCTV footage from the supermarket to confirm his presence there at the time of Jagtar's death. The footage corroborated his statement, but it left one lingering question: why did Bhupinder Pal throw the metal bar into the bushes? To investigate the situation, the officers created a fake news story claiming they had discovered a blood-stained weightlifting rod linked to Jagtar's murder in a wooded area. After this story was published, the officers waited to see how Bhupinder Pal would react. Upon reading the news, Bhupinder Pal went directly to the police station and confessed that he had thrown the weightlifting rod into the bushes. When asked why, Bhupinder Pal explained that he found the rod near Jagtar's body. At that time, he was scared that the attacker might still be in the house, so he picked up the rod and searched the entire house, including the basement, but found no one. Later, he discarded the rod in a corner of the basement. However, he forgot to tell the police that the rod was initially next to Jagtar's body. A week later, seeing the rod still in the basement made him anxious, so he decided to throw it into the bushes near their home. After the interrogation, a team of police officers searched the area around Jagtar's house and spoke with some neighbors. They spoke to a man named Scott Fewer, who was a close friend of Bhupinder Pal. Scott said he visited Bhupinder Pal the day after Jagtar's death to offer his condolences. However, he told the police that Bhupinder Pal did not appear to be sad about his wife's passing. Scott noted that the relationship between Bhupinder Pal and Jagtar Gill was unusual, as they frequently seemed to be upset with one another. He also mentioned that Bhupinder Pal had a close friendship with a 35-year-old woman named Gurpreet Ronald, who lived nearby. According to Scott, Bhupinder Pal and Gurpreet interacted very comfortably, suggesting they had known each other for a long time. After Gurpreet's name was mentioned in the case, the police invited her to the station for questioning. Upon her arrival, an officer recognized her as the woman who had been seen trying to look through the window of Jagtar's house around the time of the murder. Gurpreet had moved to Canada with her parents at a young age and later married a white Canadian man named Jason. Although they had been married for 13 years, their relationship had recently been strained by frequent arguments, largely due to suspicions of infidelity on both sides. A female detective then began questioning Gurpreet in another room, asking how she knew Jagtar. Gurpreet responded that they were not only neighbors but also very good friends. She used to drive buses for the same company as Bhupinder Pal. During further questioning, Gurpreet mentioned that she was quite close to Jagtar Gill. They would often go shopping together and spend their free time talking. The detective's next question focused on Gurpreet's activities on the day of the murder, January 29, Gurpreet said she woke up early, had breakfast, and started cleaning her house. Later, she called her friend Rosa to plan a meeting for the afternoon. Rosa, an interior designer, needed help with a project for a friend's house. Before meeting Rosa at around 12:30 p.m., Gurpreet went shopping. The investigator asked which shopping center she visited and what she bought. Gurpreet initially said she went to a store but found nothing worth purchasing, so she returned home empty-handed. However, she later changed her story, saying she encountered Bhupinderpal and his daughter Harjinder at the store, where they were buying cabbage. Gurpreet also bought a cabbage, got home around 1:30 p.m. Upon returning, she noticed an ambulance outside Bhupinderpal's house and tried to look through the window to see what was happening. After this, the female detective asked Gurpreet about the relationship between Bhupinderpal and Jagtar Gill. Gurpreet described Jagtar Gill as a very traditional woman who adheres to Indian and Punjabi customs. She volunteered additional information about her character without being prompted. She also mentioned that she frequently communicated with Bhupinderpal through calls, messages because they worked at the same job and usually had overlapping shifts. After this, the female interrogator asked Gurpreet about the interior designer, Rosa, who was supposed to visit her. Gurpreet explained that when she returned home from shopping, she found her friend Rosa waiting at her front door. The interrogator observed that Gurpreet was providing overly detailed answers, as if she felt the need to justify herself. In the interview, the interrogator noticed that Gurpreet had a bandage on one of her fingers. When asked about it, Gurpreet said she had cut her finger while cutting potatoes when the knife slipped. However, the finger she injured was the same one that had a cut on the glove found at the crime scene. The police interrogation concluded for now, but they then spoke to Gurpreet's friend Rosa. She reported that she and Gurpreet actually met at about 3:30 p.m. on January 29th, not at 1:30 p.m. as Gurpreet had previously said. Rosa mentioned that she had asked Gurpreet why an ambulance and police were present on their street that day. Gurpreet told her that Jagtar Gill, their neighbor, had been stabbed and killed. This information surprised the police because at that point, they had not yet allowed Gurpreet into the house or revealed any details about Jagtar Gill's death. Gurpreet was aware of who in the Gill family had been murdered and what weapon was used, which raised the police's suspicions about her and Bhupinderpal. It is not unusual for an attacker to accidentally injure themselves during a stabbing. As a result, the police began wiretapping the phones of Gurpreet and Bhupinderpal, hoping they would discuss Jagtar's murder, but the wiretaps did not capture any relevant conversations. When the police reviewed the call history from a month prior to the murder, they discovered that the two individuals had communicated about 250 times during that time, averaging 8 to 9 calls a day, even on the day of the murder. However, all the evidence collected so far was circumstantial and did not directly connect either of them to the crime. Among the evidence from the crime scene was DNA found near Jagtar's body. Investigators also noted a cut on Gurpreet Ronald's hand. They needed a DNA sample from Gurpreet because if she was connected to the murder, her DNA should match the samples found at the scene. To collect Gurpreet's DNA for testing, a plainclothes police investigator knocked on Gurpreet's door, claiming to be from the construction industry conducting a survey. She told Gurpreet that by participating, she could enter a draw for prizes, 6 months of free mortgage payments for the winner and a vacation for the runner-up. After hearing this, Gurpreet agreed to take part, filled out a form, and sealed it in an envelope with her saliva. The investigator took the envelope and left. This allowed the police to collect Gurpreet's DNA sample, which they sent for testing. Additionally, the police employed other tactics to gather evidence against Gurpreet. At one point, they left a note on her car that simply read "Killer." They hoped this would prompt her to call Bhupinderpal to discuss the murder. Instead, Gurpreet reported the note to the police and chose not to mention it to Bhupinderpal at all. Days later, the DNA test results revealed that Gurpreet's DNA was present in multiple areas of the house. Specifically, it was found near Jagtar's body, in the kitchen, and in several places in the upstairs bedroom. This strong evidence led the police to arrest Gurpreet on May 7, 2014, charging her with the first-degree murder of Jagtar Gill. Just 6 days after Gurpreet's arrest, on May 13, 2014, Bhupinderpal was also arrested. The police identified both men as co-accused, and they faced trial together. In court, both individuals were present, and from the start, they attempted to demonstrate their innocence. However, the investigators presented a case summary to the judge that outlined the motive for Jagtar's murder and the details of how it was executed. The summary indicated that Bhupinder Pal had been unhappy in his marriage with Jagtar Gill for some time but felt unable to divorce her due to the negative stigma surrounding divorce in their community. Additionally, Bhupinder Pal and Gurpreet had been involved in an affair for 4 years prior to Jagtar's death. Together, they conspired to murder Jagtar in order to continue their relationship. On January 29th, Bhupinder Pal took his elder daughter, Harjinder, out of the house for a specific reason. Before leaving, he placed a metal weightlifting bar near the stairs so that Gurpreet could easily find it and use it to kill Jagtar Gill when she entered the house. Following their plan, Gurpreet approached Jagtar under the guise of borrow some tools. When the time was right, she attacked Jagtar with the weightlifting bar, but this initial assault did not kill her. Gurpreet then went to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and stabbed Jagtar multiple times. Ultimately, it was the final cut to Jagtar's throat that led to her death. Gurpreet chose not to call Bhupinder Pal to inform him about the murder to avoid leaving any record of the conversation. Instead, she went directly to the supermarket and spoke to him face to face. Even more disturbing than the murder itself was that Bhupinder Pal sent his daughter into the house first, knowing that her mother's lifeless body was inside. The little girl, who was bringing a bouquet for her mother, was forced to witness a traumatic scene that would likely stay with her forever. In the court proceedings, all the police investigators gave their testimonies one by one, along with Bhupinder Pal's neighbor, Scott, an interior designer. Some post-mortem photographs of Jagtar Gill were also presented in court. However, when these images were shown, Jagtar's family members could not bear to look and left the courtroom immediately. The police presented a key witness in court named Suzanne Shields, a life coach who advises people on maintaining happiness. After hearing about the murder in the news, she contacted the police and revealed that 1 year prior, Bhupinder Pal and Gurpreet sought her advice on their relationship. Susan mentioned that they were determined to stay together and had expressed strong feelings of hatred towards Jagtar Gill. Her testimony helped the police establish the motive for Jagtar's murder in court. Gurpreet and Bhupinder Pal had different lawyers representing them, and although their lawyers told various stories, the police had already collected ample evidence. July 20, 2016, the jury declared Gurpreet Ronald and Bhupinder Pal Gill guilty of first-degree murder. They are now serving life sentences and will not be eligible for parole until 25 years later. After this, Jagtar's niece, Ramandeep Chahal, addressed the media outside the court. She read a statement that was prepared by her family. In this statement, they shared their deep feelings for Jagtar's death. Following their 2016 convictions, Bhupinder Pal Gill and Gurpreet Ronald appealed their first-degree murder sentences, arguing procedural errors in the original trial. In 2019, the Ontario Court of Appeal ordered a retrial, citing issues with the jury instructions. The retrial, held in 2021, reaffirmed the guilty verdicts for both defendants, upholding their life sentences with no parole eligibility for 25 years. This outcome solidified the court's findings that Bhupinder Pal and Gurpreet conspired to murder Jagtar Gill to continue their affair, leaving the Gill family to grapple with their ongoing loss. The murder of Jagtar Gill in Barrhaven, Canada, shattered a family and stunned a community, revealing a chilling betrayal orchestrated by her husband, Bhupinder Pal Gill, and his lover, Gurpreet Ronald. Their conspiracy, driven by a clandestine affair, led to Jagtar's brutal death, leaving her 3 children to endure profound loss. The 2016 convictions and 2021 retrial delivered justice, sentencing both to life imprisonment with no parole for 25 years, yet no punishment can heal the wounds inflicted on the Gill family. This tragedy serves as a stark reminder that trust, once broken, can unravel lives, underscoring the enduring need for compassion and accountability in the pursuit of justice. Geraldine Kriegel and Patrick Kriegel lived in Ireland. In 2006, they celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. They had a wonderful relationship. Even though they faced infertility, they did not lose hope. Both had successful careers, financial stability, and they wanted to adopt. They were waiting for confirmation of their documents. Finally, Geraldine and Patrick received news that a 2-year-old girl from Russia is available for adoption. Her name was Anastasia. She was born on February 18, 2004, in Novokuznetsk, Russia. Immediately after birth, she was taken to an orphanage because her biological mother was unable to provide for her. Anastasia spent her entire childhood mostly alone, as the caregivers primarily focused on more demanding children. This lack of attention resulted in her having difficulty expressing emotions. Geraldine and Patrick was overjoyed when they learned about Anastasia. They quickly developed a close relationship with her. On August 10, 2006, they brought her home, and this date became a family holiday. From now on, her name is Anastasia Anna Kriegel, affectionately called Anna. The day when laughter filled their home was the day that Geraldine and Patrick truly became parents. They wanted Anna to remember her culture, so they bought her a matryoshka doll. The once quiet life of Geraldine and Patrick turned into a fun adventure. Anna was daddy's angel and mommy's princess. They tried to diversify their lives as much as possible. They went ice skating and planned excursions every summer. They vacationed in Patrick's hometown of Annecy, France, where they had a house, and Anna made several friends. She always looked forward to this trip, enjoyed France, and even studied French. However, there were obstacles in Anna's life. She struggled with learning English, and her mother helped her because she wanted Anna to be able to communicate with her peers. Anna also faced challenges in forming close relationships and expressing her emotions. Time spent without adequate care in the orphanage led her to be uncomfortable with physical affection. Nonetheless, Geraldine and Patrick were able to help Anna overcome this emotional emptiness through their unconditional love, support. A nurturing environment, combined with educational activities, healthy eating, and sports, laid a solid foundation for Anna's future. Unfortunately, the girl also faced health concerns. During a routine examination, the doctor discovered a tumor in her right ear, which caused hearing loss, as well as partial blindness in her right eye. Despite these difficulties, Anna grew into an energetic and joyful girl. However, her hearing and vision problems made studying difficult, leading to poor academic performance in elementary school. She attended consultations with specialists until the 3rd grade in order to keep up with her peers. In her everyday life, Anna took her challenges to heart. This affected her self-esteem and diminished her desire to live in this world. One day, while walking home and enjoying the fresh air with music playing through her favorite headphones, she encountered 4 boys who blocked her path. They made fun of her, one even pinched her. Anna ran home in tears and told her mother. Geraldine and Patrick took this incident seriously and filed a complaint against the boys, informing the police about the boy who had touched Anna. However, he was let off with just a warning. Consequently, the parents decided to accompany Anna to school and pick her up every day themselves, but this led to more ridicule. She vented her feelings on social media, seeking acceptance from her peers. This situation deeply affected Geraldine. It was painful for her to see how unhappy her daughter was. Soon, Anna began to inflict physical harm on herself to drown out the emotional pain. The parents realized the severity of the situation and worried that their child might take more drastic actions. Geraldine's only wish was for her daughter to be happy. Finally, Anna began to show signs of improvement thanks to personal therapy. She made some friends with whom she had sleepovers, went for walks, watched movies, discussed boys. As Anna's high school education was coming to an end, on a sunny day, May 13, 2018, Geraldine wanted to help her daughter prepare for a test. On weekends, they usually did their homework together. Their hard work, that day they decided to take a break. They turned on the TV, made popcorn, and watched a movie while hugging Anna's cousins. Geraldine joined them and ordered pizza. The children played games while the adults sipped wine and enjoyed snacks, filling the house with a joyful atmosphere. May 14, 2018, began as usual. Geraldine got on the train headed to Dublin while Anna went to school. After lunch, she had an appointment with a psychologist. Patrick, who had retired by this time, took the opportunity to sleep a little longer. Classes ended at 4 p.m., and Anna called her mother, but there was no answer because Geraldine was at an important meeting. She wrote a message to her daughter, saying that she would call back soon. When Anna came home, Patrick was relaxing in the garden and heard the doorbell. A young man was standing at the threshold. He was the same age as Anna. Patrick was not expecting guests, and Anna was surprised to see the guy. Patrick had never seen him before. Anna's joy was obvious. She whispered something to the guy, grabbed her favorite sweater, and told her father that she would be back soon. Patrick reminded her that she needed to study, which she had forgotten because of the sudden guest. He saw them leave for the park. Patrick was not immediately worried since the park was only a 20-minute walk from their home. At 5:10 p.m., Geraldine returned home and tried to call Anna, but she did not answer. Not wanting to overreact, she thought Anna would be home soon. However, Anna did not return. Patrick told his wife that Anna had gone to the park with some guy. This was strange considering Anna's difficulties with communication. Geraldine immediately texted Anna, asking her to come home. When there was still no answer, it alarmed the parents, especially considering Anna's previous issues with bullying and her health problems. Concerned, Geraldine decided to go to the park, but there were no traces of Anna there. Geraldine and Patrick began searching the streets in their car, trying to find any signs of Anna. Their fear deepened when they realized they knew nothing about the young man Anna had been with. By their own efforts proved unsuccessful, by 9 p.m., they reported Anna's disappearance to the police, emphasizing that her lack of response to calls and messages was out of character for her. They also informing the police about the unknown guy. The police quickly tracked down the young man, whose name was Boy B. His family was surprised by the police's arrival. Investigators asked Boy B to describe Anna's whereabouts, and he said that they had walked together until 5:40 p.m. before he went home. After that, the police began searching for Anna. They combed the area and reviewed footage from surveillance cameras. Patrick and Geraldine provided photographs of Anna, including one in which she was wearing the black sweatshirt she had worn in that evening. Supporters gathered around Geraldine and Patrick, while the police carefully studied video recordings showing Boy B and Anna in the park around 5 p.m. At 5:14 p.m., they left the park through a different exit, but after that, Anna seemed to have vanished without a trace. Her disappearance became a mystery. Progress in the investigation was made when they managed to find a witness who saw Anna and Boy B walking through the park. Video footage captured Boy B walking alone through the park at 5:49 p.m. Under pressure from the police, Boy B admitted that he was with another friend named Boy A. Boy A liked Anna, and Boy B was acting as an intermediary between them. With this new information, investigators intensified their efforts and began broadcasting information about the search for Anna across all social networks, as well as in local newspapers. Simultaneously, they searched for Boy A. His backpack was found. Video footage showed him entering and exiting the park, but he had been absent for a long time. Some opinions suggested that Anna might have run away, but this theory was quickly dismissed. To resolve the mystery of Anna's disappearance, detectives organized a step-by-step recreation of the events that had occurred in the park that day alongside Boy B and Boy A, under their parents' supervision. The interaction between the boys raised the police's suspicions, so they were separated for individual interrogations. Boy B's testimony remained consistent. Boy B began the interview the previous day by repeating what he had told police the previous week, that Boy A had asked him to call Anna's house, in Leixlip, just outside Dublin in County Kildare, and bring her to meet him at St. Catherine's Park, so they could talk. And that he had left Anna with Boy A before going home to do his homework. During the investigation, police reviewed more than 700 hours of CCTV footage from the area around where Anna went missing. The detectives, Daly and Gannon, repeatedly told Boy B that the route he claimed they had taken that day did not match what was recorded by cameras in and around St. Catherine's Park, which is on the Lucan side of Leixlip, on the border between County Kildare and County Dublin. But Boy B stuck to his story, offering various explanations to police about the inconsistencies between the CCTV footage and his account. They said that, on a later occasion, they were attacked by two strange men, resulting in a fight where Boy A hit one of the men on the head. Both men ran away. He then showed the police the injuries they had inflicted, including scratches on his arms and legs and a cut on his face. These men could have been responsible for Anna's disappearance, so the detectives needed their descriptions. The police also seized the boy's belongings to conduct examinations for DNA evidence of the attackers. As the investigation progressed, police brought in specialized search units, including divers and a rescue team, to check nearby bodies of water. In total, 60 people were involved in the search for Anna, including volunteers and the Kriegel family. Anna's disappearance became a sensational news story. Her photo in a black sweatshirt became a symbol of her search. Near the park, there is Glenwood House, a derelict farmhouse designed by James Gondon in the 19th century, located in a town of Coldblow, west of Lucan. One of the eyewitnesses reported seeing young people and police entering it, so the police went there to investigate. The house was 2 stories, sat on 42 acres of land. It was in ruins, with the roofs and walls having collapsed. It is unclear why the police had not checked there earlier. They conducted a thorough examination of both the house itself and the fields behind it. The search began in the park, where they meticulously searched every bush before gradually moving toward the abandoned house. The police checked the utility room while the volunteers searched the main building. It was very dark inside as there was no light in the room. The policeman was taken aback by the pungent smell filling the room. Once his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he realized that in front of him lay a naked female body, next to which lay clothes and a broken telephone. On the floor, there were traces of blood beside a brick and a large branch. Judging by the clothing, it was the body of Anna. There were multiple wounds on her body, and her neck was wrapped in duct tape. Her hand lay as if she had been trying to tear off the duct tape herself. It was evident that she had fought valiantly for her life. Her naked body, wearing only socks, lay among broken bottles and garbage. Many questions arose about how this could have happened, who was responsible for this crime. Why was Anna in this building? This incident irrevocably changed the lives of Geraldine and Patrick. The death of their long-awaited and beloved daughter was an indescribable tragedy for them. The whole city learned the details of what happened, and most people were in shock. Glenwood House, located near the park where children had played peacefully, was now the scene of a terrible crime. An autopsy revealed that Anna had sustained about a dozen wounds all over her body, including bruises and cuts, primarily on her head, face, and neck. The cause of death was attributed to blunt force trauma to the head, as well as asphyxiation, indicating that Anna had been abused. Based on the traces of semen found, it remains unclear whether she was conscious during the assault. Her death occurred between 5:25 and 5:54 p.m., just a few minutes after she left the park. At the entrance to the building, she was struck with a heavy stick that had nails sticking out of it before being hit with a brick. Blood on the walls and evidence suggested that the attacker dragged her body to the window, most likely to limit visibility for anyone outside. After collecting all the evidence, the police arrested 2 individuals. Boy B and Boy A, who were last seen with Anna, were suspected of the murder. In Boy A's backpack, a mask with the image of a zombie was found with traces of Anna's blood, along with gloves, shin guards, and knee pads. The semen found matched Boy A's DNA. Anna's blood was also located on his shoes and clothes. His mother believed he had been attacked and then washed his clothing. Boy A denied involvement in Anna's death despite the evidence found at the crime scene. No DNA was detected from Boy B, and there was no blood found on his belongings. During interrogation, Boy B admitted that he had seen Anna enter the abandoned house with Boy A but was unaware of his friend's intentions. Boy B wanted to approach the house but was frightened by screams at the entrance. He witnessed Boy A tearing off Anna's clothes and then turned to Boy B, his face reflecting the danger that prompted Boy B to remain silent. It later emerged that Boy A had shared his vile plans with Boy B. Both boys were released on bail pending a trial date, which angered local residents not only because they feared for their safety but also because the identities of the criminals had not been made public. Both boys came from respectable and successful families and had no criminal histories or psychological problems, which surprised the residents of the city. The hearing of their case took place on April 29, 2019. It was a closed hearing, attended by the parents of the defendants, as well as Geraldine and Patrick, who found the proceedings difficult but promised to defend their daughter to the end. The prosecutor stated that Boy B had lured Anna out of the house under the pretense of facilitating a meeting with Boy A, whom she liked, while Boy A took her to the abandoned house and abused her. The jury trial took place on June 18. Boy A was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 12 years. Boy B was also found guilty in Anna's death, receiving a 15-year sentence with the possibility of parole after 8 years, despite the lack of material evidence. According to the law, their identities must remain confidential. If released, they would be given new identification. However, the harshest sentence was borne by Anna's parents, as Geraldine stated that life without Anna had ceased to hold meaning. Patrick died on June 19, 2022, haunted by the guilt of allowing his daughter to go with a stranger that day. The tragic loss of Anna Kriegel left an indelible mark on her family and the community of Leixlip. Geraldine and Patrick, who had poured their love, hope into building a joyful life for their adopted daughter, were shattered by her brutal murder. The conviction of Boy A and Boy B, though a step toward justice, could not fill the void left by Anna's absence. Anna's memory lives on in the hearts of those who loved her. The Lundy family lived a quiet life in Palmerston North, New Zealand, a cozy town with a pleasant atmosphere. The spouses' names were Mark Edward Lundy and Christine Marie Lundy. At this time, they had been married for 17 years. They almost never quarreled and had one child, a daughter named Amber. She was cheerful, sociable, and becoming a model student in her elementary school. Amber was also a member of the Scouts. The Lundy family owned a business, which Mark ran as the public face of the company, while Christine took on a significant portion of the administrative work. However, they chose a narrowly specialized activity that was not very popular. As a result, the business did not develop as they had hoped. Despite their stubborn efforts to invest and grow the business, they incurred losses, which ultimately left them with about $100,000 in debt. As their business prospects seemed bleak, Mark decided to seek alternative sources of income. In 1999, he purchased 2 plots of land in Hawke's Bay, New Zealand, about a 2-hour drive from their family home, where he planned to invest in a winery and grape growing. He hoped this new venture would support him, but unfortunately, that did not materialize. He missed payments for the land, and due to late fees, the new business quickly began to incur even greater losses. Mark missed several payment deadlines, resulting in interest penalties of approximately 14%. At the time of the murder, the Lundy family owed $140,000 in interest penalties. The final deadline was August 30, 2000, the day his wife and daughter were found dead. On the morning of August 29, 2000, Mark went to Pet One, near Wellington, about 150 km from Palmerston North, to address some business-related matters and to sell a couple of kitchen sinks, which was a common task for him. Around 5 p.m. that same day, he checked into a motel in Pet One. Half an hour later, he called Christine, and they spoke for 8 minutes. She shared her plans of taking Amber out to dinner at McDonald's. After their conversation, she made another call to a friend and then left with Amber for dinner. Later, a receipt from the cafe was found at their home, but there was no further news from Christine. The next morning, Mark went to more meetings. He called Christine again, but she did not answer. After waiting some time and trying twice more, he found it strange that she was not responding. Normally, she would answer right away. Concerned, Mark decided to reach out to Christine's friend, but she seemed rushed and unable to help. At around 9 a.m., Glenn Wedgery, Christine's brother, went to Lundy's house to see Christine about his GST return. A horrifying scene unfolded before his eyes as he entered the house. He saw both Christine and Amber in tragic situations. Immediately, Glenn notified the police and Mark. Upon arriving in Palmerston North, Mark found that the road to their house was blocked by police. He was detained and told he needed to go with them to the station because his wife and daughter were deceased. Overwhelmed with grief, Mark could not believe what they were telling him and was visibly distraught. The officers decided that the news was too much for him, so they took him to the station in a patrol car. Once at the station, Glenn was already there. Glenn owned a small business and occasionally sought help from Christine with administrative issues. On the morning of August 30th, he first called Christine to confirm whether she was busy, but she did not answer. Knowing that his sister was responsible and unlikely to cancel a planned meeting at the last minute, he decided to go to her house. Rarely using the main entrance, and out of habit as a close relative, he entered through the back door. To his surprise, Glenn found that the back door was wide open and it was suspiciously quiet inside. At first, he decided not to attach any importance to it. He walked inside and greeted the family, but no one answered. When Glenn walked around the house, he understood why he was being ignored. First, Glenn found Amber. More precisely, he thought it was Amber, because given the state of the body, it was difficult to identify the girl. She showed no signs of life. He checked her pulse and confirmed that she was dead. Glenn noticed how badly her head was disfigured. It looked like a bloody mess. Then, he found his sister lying naked in bed. Her head and face were also badly disfigured. Glenn immediately called the police. While waiting for law enforcement, he remained in the house, sitting at the kitchen table, not understanding what could have happened to his loved ones. When the police and paramedics arrived on the scene, they immediately assessed the scale of the attacker's cruelty. The scene showed that both Christine and Amber had been attacked with such fury that parts of their brain and skull fragments were found on the floor and walls. A large piece of brain matter was even found on the ceiling in Christine's bedroom. Judging by the position of the bodies, it seemed Christine had tried to escape, but the attacker caught up with her in the hallway and beat her to death with blows to the head from a heavy object. The house was carefully examined, and it turned out that only Christine's jewelry box was missing. The police had no clues. Forensic experts were only able to find a broken latch on one of the windows, suggesting the thief probably entered through it. Additionally, there was a small blood stain here, which seemed too far from the scene of the attack and was likely left by the criminal. Despite the fact that some valuables were missing, this crime did not appear to be related to robbery and seemed more personal in nature, given the severity of the attack. Mark was obviously traumatized by the news of his family's death. Even when he was brought to the police station, he still could not formulate his thoughts coherently. However, after a while, he calmed down and was able to communicate with law enforcement officers. He described in detail the last day of his trip on the eve of the massacre. He had a reliable alibi since he was in another city engaged in selling kitchen sinks, which was confirmed by numerous witnesses. Mark described his nearly two-decade marriage as a sincere and loving relationship, but admitted that he had not had intimacy with his wife for quite some time, which seemed like a serious contradiction. Mark was reluctant to go into intimate details about his marriage, as if he were hiding something. Nevertheless, during questioning, he admitted that to compensate for the lack of an intimate life, he periodically used escort services. While Mark was at the motel, he read a book, drank half a bottle of rum, called a business partner at 8:28 p.m., and then at 11:30 p.m. contacted an escort agency and used the services of a call girl. He left the motel early in the morning and went on business, and by 8 a.m., he was already selling sinks. Mark's first client also told the police that he had tried to contact his wife several times that morning, but she had ignored his calls. After Mark's interrogation, the police were almost certain that he was innocent. At least, he did not raise any suspicions. The only questionable point in his story was his regular infidelity, which he had tried to hide during the early stages of the interrogation. As a result, his behavior was attributed to guilt over his infidelity. Mark was released, but they did not remove him from the list of suspects, as further checks of many facts were necessary since husbands are often responsible for such crimes. Law enforcement agencies briefly mentioned that Christine and Amber had died from multiple blows to the head from a heavy object, something like a weapon or small axe. However, nothing like this could be found at the scene of the massacre. A later forensic examination allowed investigators to find remnants of Fleck brand paint in the victim's hair, and its color was identical to that which Mark used to mark his own tools in case he lent them to someone. After comparing these facts, the police began searching for something like an axe that could be on the list of Mark's tools. Mark confirmed that there should be an axe in the garage, but it was not found during the search. The tool had disappeared. The most suitable place to dispose of the weapon was a river flowing near the crime scene. Several groups of divers combed the bottom but found nothing. Despite this, the detectives were sure that Mark was not involved in the murder and that the criminal had simply used his axe. However, this belief was not universally shared. At the funeral of his wife and daughter, Mark was heartbroken. He cried during the entire service, could not even get up when everyone else did. He had to be escorted to the car because he could not walk normally. Many thought that Mark was simply overacting, trying to hide his guilt and confuse everyone. While Mark's family supported him in every way and confirmed that it was very difficult for him. However, the rumors proved impossible to stop. Everywhere Mark went, people looked for some kind of catch and tried to find a way to incriminate him. It got so bad that the police even had to hold another press conference at which law enforcement officers confirmed that Mark was essentially another victim in this situation, just like the deceased, so he was not considered a suspect in the murder. At the same time, forensic experts continued to collect information, and inconsistencies began to emerge. It turned out that a few hours before the murder and for several hours afterward, Mark's phone was disabled. This was contrary to the usual activity of a man who often received calls. Then a woman came to the police station, introducing herself as a neighbor of the Lundy family, Margaret Dance. The witness reported that on the night of that fateful day, she went to a choir rehearsal at about 7:15 p.m. As she was leaving, she saw a stout man running down the street, dressed in overalls, with light curly hair that looked like a wig. It seemed that it was a man trying to disguise himself as a woman. When the stranger ran past her, she recognized Mark. He ran by without saying a word or turning around. Margaret was sure that it was Mark, who should not have been in the area because of his absence, and all of this seemed suspicious. Following this statement, the police officers decided to check on Mark again. This time, they obtained a warrant to search his car, exposing the interior thoroughly. Mark admitted that he had driven it on the night of the 30th. Having analyzed the clothing found, forensic experts discovered two stains resembling blood, a large drop that belonged to Mark and a smaller one that belonged to Christine. However, the second stain was very small. Given the brutal nature of the massacre, the criminal should have stained much more, considering that the walls and even the ceiling were splattered with blood. Forensic experts suggested that the trace could have appeared on Mark's shirt before. Perhaps Christine accidentally cut herself while cooking and stained her husband's shirt. The other blood stain belonged to Mark and was much larger. In its center, forensic scientists found a small mucus substance the size of a grain of rice. They assumed that the owner of the shirt might have blown his nose into it but decided to conduct a more thorough analysis. For this, they invited an expert who used a new testing technique called immunohistochemistry. Based on the results, the specialist concluded that the mucus substance was indeed a piece of Christine's brain, which could not have ended up on Mark's shirt. Investigators suggested that these particles got onto the shirt via the jumpsuit, which had most of the bloodstains, that Mark simply disposed of the clothes by throwing them into a garbage container far from his home. It seemed probable that Mark was indeed near the crime scene at the time of the murder. After checking the chronology of events, detectives realized there was a 3-hour window for which Mark had no confirmed alibi. To accurately determine the time of death of the victims, additional tests were required. The forensic expert examined the contents of the stomach of the deceased, concluded that the time of death for Christine and Amber coincided with the 3-hour window that Mark needed to account for. To prove that he could have made such a long trip, the police obtained a receipt for Mark's gasoline purchase, then compared the amount of gasoline he used that day, questioned him in detail, and calculated the approximate mileage. However, it turned out that he consumed much more gasoline than was required for the trip to and from the city, about twice as much. All this did not fit into the overall picture and raised even more suspicions against Christine's husband. Now, detectives began to take Mark seriously as the main suspect in the double murder. According to investigators, after the massacre, he broke the window latch and stole a jewelry box. He also undressed his wife to confuse the investigation with contradictory details. Then, he disposed of the murder weapon, overalls, and the blonde wig he had been wearing that morning. After that, he went to a neighboring town to sell the stolen items while maintaining the illusion that the situation was normal. He even created a fuss and called his friend, asking her to check what had happened to Christine. In turn, Mark continued to insist on his innocence. The investigators lacked direct evidence: a jumpsuit, a wig, a jewelry box, and an axe. All of these were missing, making it impossible to take fingerprints. The detectives decided to verify their conclusions by independently driving the route that the alleged criminal should have taken in 3 hours. With great difficulty and constant speeding, they managed to approximate the time gap theoretically. Given a sufficient reserve of time and not wasting it, Mark could have dealt with his family. It was surprising how he managed to avoid being stopped for constant speeding on the way in both directions. The motive for the crime was still in question. After all, the Lundy spouses seemed to be a loving couple, making it hard to believe that Mark was capable of killing his wife and daughter. The detectives decided to investigate issues in the family's financial situation. As it turned out, on August 28th, the day before the murder, Mark received a notice that he urgently needed to make a payment for vineyard land, or he could lose it. He had only 5 days to do so, and the penalty for failing to comply was significant: $140,000, a sum the family did not have. On the same day, Mark suggested to Christine that they increase the amount of her life insurance policies from $200,000 to $500,000. They followed through, although there was naturally no reasonable justification for such additional expenses. A day later, someone dealt with Christine and child. All this seemed even more premeditated given the timing. When his wife and daughter died, the new policy had not yet taken effect. In fact, even if his bloody plan succeeded, Mark would not have received the expected payout. After Christine's death, however, the insurance company paid $75,000 toward the mortgage, but Mark never saw it. In February 2001, Mark, whom law enforcement initially supported, was arrested for the murders of Christine and Amber. He was denied bail and awaited the start of the hearing behind bars. The trial was scheduled for 2002. The prosecution claimed that he killed his wife and daughter for the insurance money, with his primary target being his wife. Amber became an accidental victim. He did not intend to harm her, but when the girl witnessed the murder, he was forced to take action. The jury heard the entire list of arguments and evidence against Mark. Unfortunately, the prosecutor's office lacked the murder weapon, but they believed that the evidence of his guilt was already sufficient to convince the jury. Mark, contesting the prosecution's claims, had his defense attorney argue that a loving husband would never harm his family. The lawyer pointed out apparent gaps and inconsistencies in the prosecution's tactics. After considering both sides, the jury deliberated for 7 hours. Mark was found guilty of double murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 17 years. However, the fight for his freedom was just beginning. Only the lawyers and Mark were dissatisfied with the verdict. They promptly began the appeals process, but 4 months later, the appeal was rejected and the minimum time for parole was increased to 20 years. Interestingly, at this point, Mark's support grew even more, contrasting with his initial situation after the tragic death of his family. The prosecution provided a highly questionable timeline that seemed far-fetched. In light of this, those who previously considered Mark a killer began to shift their stance. The 3-hour time frame in which the crime occurred appeared implausible, given the journey and the disposal of evidence involved. Even with a high speed of about 120 kilometers per hour, the police could only travel from city to city in approximately 1 hour and 33 minutes. It would have taken even more time to deal with 2 victims and dispose of the murder weapon, in addition to returning. All of this seemed unrealistic. To dispute the allegations, even a drop of brain matter found on Mark's shirt was scrutinized, as the method of analysis used was deemed too inaccurate. 7 years after the trial, an article was published about the tragic massacre of the Lundy family, detailing arguments that were previously unknown to the public. It meticulously refuted all the prosecution's claims, even questioning the words of the neighbor, Margaret. Some inconsistencies, including the time frames she provided, did not match the prosecution's narrative. At the trial, she indicated that the murders were committed the evening before a scheduled visit, claiming to have seen a man at about 7:15 p.m. She stated that at that moment there were 7 people standing near the takeaway food shops who should also have seen Mark in disguise. However, none of them saw him running around the area in a wig. The prosecutor insisted that Mark had changed the time on his computer and had cleaned the system, but later, upon inspection, it was discovered that the hard drive had, in fact, been infected with a virus that was randomly corrupting files. Mark simply didn't know about it yet. At that point, even a reanalysis of the paint found in Amber's hair failed to find a match with the substance that Mark had used to clean his tools. The defense insisted that the police had focused on Mark from the very beginning. All attempts to acquit him from the start were more likely made to divert attention, a way to gain trust. The authorities had several other suspects who did not even have an alibi, but they were simply ignored. Soon after the article was published, Mark's defenders filed another appeal and turned to the highest judicial instance in New Zealand. This became the last chance to acquit Mark. The preliminary hearings took place in 2013, and the lawyers prepared a strong case that provided answers to all the controversial allegations of the prosecution. Thanks to this, everyone began to seriously doubt Mark's guilt. His defenders even secured his family's bail after 18 months pending trial, and this has been ongoing for 12 years. The hearings began in the spring of 2015, and interestingly, the prosecution radically changed its tactics. The prosecutor's office completely reworked the timeline, claiming that Mark committed the murder at night after returning home from a visit with a call girl, giving him enough time to get home, have breakfast in a cafe in another city, and continue his business trips. According to eyewitnesses, he behaved quite calmly and was in a good mood. Some of the controversial arguments were discarded, while others were reworked to better fit the situation. The prosecution clearly did not intend to give up, even new witnesses appeared. For example, a cleaner who went to Lundy House on the 28th said that she sensed a lot of tension between the spouses. The defense also intended to present compelling arguments. New technologies now allowed for a different approach to assessing evidence. DNA samples from 2 unidentified men were found under the fingernails of Christine, which did not match the materials belonging to Mark. Additionally, it was discovered that during the initial investigation, the police had ignored several compelling pieces of evidence. For example, dark hair found in Christine's hand clearly did not belong to her. 10 hairs were found under the right fingernail and 11 under the left. The hairs were sent to the ESR for testing in 2 plastic bags. The bags remained untouched at the ESR for 9 months and were then returned to the police in June 2001. After his conviction in 2002, Mark wrote to the police asking that all material relating to his case be preserved. The police ignored this request and destroyed the hairs in December 2003. Detective Inspector Mark Hercock, the lead investigator at the 2015 retrial, confirmed that the hairs had never been examined or tested. The lawyer provided a new theory, suggesting that the killer could have been Glenn, Christine's brother, the very person who discovered the bodies and waited in the kitchen for the police to arrive. He had explained the scratch on his nose as a mark from a domestic cat, which led the police to leave him alone. At that time, however, the police had searched Christine's brother's house and car. They used luminol and found blood stains in both, but did not investigate further, which could have belonged to the murdered women. Glenn's neighbor admitted that he had long suspected Glenn of the murder because he had witnessed Glenn trying to dispose of some clothes. During the hearings, the prosecution claiming that Christine's brother had unhealthy tendencies and had molested Christine, leading to the deaths when she discovered it. Naturally, by this point, the defense had lost significant arguments to support these theories, as a lot of time had passed and traces were no longer available. Another strong point for the defense involved communication with an expert who identified the brand on the shirt. According to him, he had worked in a laboratory not intended for this kind of analysis. The technique was completely new and untested, and he likely made mistakes. The defense argued that the stains on the shirt could have originated from a meat pie. New studies were conducted with the best specialists, but they all concluded that the sample was poorly preserved and unsuitable for analysis. The only thing they could confirm was that the stain was from human tissue, but its origin was unknown, hence, this evidence was excluded as unreliable. Margaret was also not invited to the courtroom, and her testimony was disregarded. The defense presented a new theory regarding what could have happened to Christine and Amber. They argued that shortly before the murders, the family began receiving threats regarding debts, suggesting that someone came to the Lundy house to intimidate Mark into paying them off more quickly. This argument sounded quite convincing, but the prosecution insisted that only Mark had a substantial motive to get rid of his loved ones due to mounting financial problems and fear of being exposed by his wife as a bankrupt. The increase in the life insurance policy right before the murders seemed suspicious to the prosecutor and could not be considered coincidental. The jury deliberated for more than 15 hours. After these hearings, many jurors hesitated and could not reach a consensus. The Supreme Court upholding the previous verdict, Mark was sent back to jail to serve the remaining 8 years of his 20-year sentence before he could apply for parole. However, the defense did not give up and attempted to file an appeal in 2017, which became possible after changes in legislation. They focused on the obvious errors in the investigation and inconsistencies in the prosecution's version, but the court confirmed the sentence once more. The Court of Appeal ruled that the mRNA evidence was new science that had never been used before or since and should not have been presented to the jury, but upheld Mark's conviction. This was the interim provision, the mechanism that allowed the Court of Appeal to dismiss Mark's appeal. Mark's lawyer, Jonathan Eaton QC, then argued in the High Court that Mark had been the victim of junk science, and in May 2019 he was granted leave to appeal to the High Court, based solely on the interim provision argument. On December 20, 2019, the New Zealand High Court dismissed Mark's appeal, stating in its closing that other evidence demonstrates beyond reasonable doubt that Mr. Mark murdered Christine and Amber Lundy. Mark remained unable to fight for his freedom until 2022 when, in August, he was given the right to apply for parole. He was hopeful for release, but the commission refused, citing that he did not provide a plan to address his aggression issues. He maintained that he had not killed anyone and had no anger management problems, making it impossible for him to create such a plan. Despite the denial, a retrial of the appeal took place in May 2003. This time, the counsel sought to understand what motivated him regarding his family. Mark again insisted on his innocence, stating he would rather die in prison than admit to something he didn't do. This only worsened his situation, as he was denied release and required to undergo rehabilitation for alcohol issues he had faced before his imprisonment. Mark's relatives supported him, understanding he could not confess to a murder he did not commit, as this would destroy his struggle for freedom that had lasted for 2 decades. However, he remains hopeful of ever being released and continues to insist on his innocence. In 2025, North and South journalist Mike White revealed that other forensic evidence, such as hair samples from Christine's fingernails, had never been tested. A scientist had found blood-soaked fibers on a window next to the door where police believed the perpetrator had entered the Lundys' home. Police had also sent these fibers to the Institute of Environmental Science and Research, but again, they had never been tested. Police could not explain why the fibers had never been tested. After another hearing in April 2025, Mark was pardoned after serving 23 years in prison. He is scheduled to be released in May. He will face a variety of restrictions including a ban on online dating, social media, and media interviews. He will be required to notify his probation office of any relationships or employment. The tragic case of the Lundy family remains one of New Zealand's most controversial and polarizing criminal cases. After over 2 decades of legal battles, Mark Lundy's pardon in April 2025, following 23 years of imprisonment, marked a significant turning point. The untested forensic evidence, such as the hair samples and blood-soaked fibers, raised serious questions about the integrity of the original investigation and the reliability of the evidence used to convict him. While some continue to believe in Mark's guilt, citing the financial motive and the timing of the insurance policy increase, Others argue that the prosecution's case was built on circumstantial evidence and flawed science, leaving room for reasonable doubt. Mark's release, accompanied by strict probation conditions, reflects the ongoing tension between justice and uncertainty in this case. As he steps into a new chapter of his life, the unresolved questions surrounding the deaths of Christine and Amber Lundy continue to haunt those seeking the truth. In 2012, Kim Dorsey was 38 years old. She had earned a degree in civil engineering from the University of North Florida. As a certified general contractor, she owned her own construction company and also served as the director of training for the Quality Assurance Department at Inspection Depot. She lived in a beautiful home with her husband, Derek Dorsey. Derek, a firefighter with 20 years of experience, was well respected in his community. Kim appeared to be an incredible individual, and many believed she had an ideal marriage. However, no one can truly know what happens behind closed doors in any relationship, even one that seems perfect. On October 28, 2012, Derek returned home from work to discover a horrifying scene. His wife, Kim, was lifeless. He immediately called 911, telling the operator he was performing CPR but suspected she was already dead. When asked what had happened, Derek speculated that Kim might have harmed herself. Emergency responders quickly arrived at the scene, but Kim was pronounced dead. Despite Derek's explanation, the detectives quickly determined that there was criminal activity involved in the case. When Derek found Kim, he covered her body with a blanket. Later, when the medical examiner removed the blanket, the extent of the violence she had endured became shockingly clear. Derek told investigators that he had gone to work the previous morning, as firefighters typically work 24-hour shifts. He returned home around 8 a.m. on Sunday, October 28. He explained that when he walked into the bedroom, he expected to find Kim in bed. However, the room, darkened by thick curtains, revealed a tragic sight. Kim was lying on the floor at the foot of the bed. By the time he called 911, she had already passed away. The autopsy determined that Kim had been dead for about 24 hours before Derek's call. At the crime scene, police uncovered significant pieces of evidence. Kim's wrists and ankles were bound with plastic ties. Nearby, investigators found a broken pool stick, a gun, and a knife, all discovered close to her body. Bullet holes were observed on the wall and in the bedroom doorway, indicating gunfire. The scene also showed clear signs of a struggle. In the kitchen, drawers had been pulled open with their contents emptied, as though someone had been searching for something. Oddly, unusual items such as remote controls and a keypad from a surround sound system were found in the sink. The front doors showed no signs of forced entry, though a ceramic dog statue near the door had been knocked over. Detectives were skeptical about the possibility of a stranger breaking in, tying up Kim, stabbing her, and beating her with a pool stick. The circumstances suggested that Kim likely knew her attacker, or that the person who entered the house had access without needing to force their way in. With this in mind, Derek became the primary suspect and was brought in for questioning. Investigators asked him to recount his activities over the weekend and to describe the nature of his relationship with Kim. He said that on Friday, October 26, Kim went shopping for a few hours and they spent the evening watching a movie together. On Saturday morning, he claimed to have left for work at about 7 a.m. and returned home on Sunday around 8 a.m., as his firefighter shifts often required working 24 hours straight. He stated that he had tried calling his wife multiple times during the 24 hours he was at work, but poor cell reception at his remote station had prevented the calls from connecting. Initially, Derek's story appeared to align with the evidence. However, one detail raised investigators' suspicions. During the 911 call, Derek suggested that Kim might have harmed herself, despite his professional background as a firefighter. Detectives found it odd that someone with his level of training would fail to recognize the violent nature of the crime scene. This raised questions about whether Derek was hiding something or had been involved in the crime. When questioned about their marriage, Derek admitted that they had an open relationship, allowing them to pursue other romantic connections. However, he stated that Kim had stopped participating in such outside relationships years earlier, after the death of her mother. Since then, Kim had struggled with grief and sought professional help. She was also on medication that caused weight gain, affecting her confidence and leaving her feeling less attractive. Detectives are questioning whether Derek wanted to end this open lifestyle or if his actions were motivated by other factors. Marital infidelity and personal struggles can sometimes contribute to tragic events, so investigators are exploring whether these may have been connected to Kim's sudden death. Derek admitted to being in a relationship with another woman. Detectives wanted to investigate whether Derek might have had a motive to end his marriage with Kim. They questioned whether he might have gained financially from her death. When asked about life insurance, he explained that his wife did not have a policy. Detectives also examined relevant details, such as the time it would have taken Derek to drive from his fire station to their home, a 15-mile journey that would have required approximately an hour for a round trip. After interviewing all of his co-workers at the small fire station, the investigators confirmed that he had a solid alibi. The investigators then shifted their focus, exploring a different possibility. They were aware of Derek's girlfriend and pondered whether she might have had a motive. In love triangles, emotions such as jealousy or resentment can lead to extreme actions. Perhaps Derek had promised to leave Kim for his girlfriend but failed to follow through, leading to tension. However, investigators questioned his girlfriend and found that she had an unshakable alibi, ruling her out as a suspect. The detectives decided to revisit the crime scene for further analysis. In complex cases with unclear evidence, specialists like blood spatter analysts are often brought in to uncover critical details. Their goal was to determine the sequence of incidents, where the attack began, where it ended, and what might have happened in between. Experts concluded that Kim was initially injured near the bedside table, where the left side of the bed was covered in blood. She was gravely wounded and remained there for some time. Evidence suggested that Kim eventually regained consciousness and fought back. She managed to reach her gun, a 5-shot revolver, and fired all 5 rounds towards someone who was possibly standing in the doorway. Despite her efforts, none of the shots struck the attacker. Analysis of the bullet trajectories revealed that they were fired upward, indicating that Kim was either sitting or lying on the bedroom floor when she fired. Once the attacker realized Kim was out of ammunition, he re-entered the room with a pool stick and continued the assault, beating her until the stick broke. Breaking a pool stick requires substantial force, and forensic analysis showed that it shattered while striking Kim's body. The attack escalated further when the perpetrator stabbed her in the neck. A detailed forensic investigation uncovered key details about the crime. The pool stick, later identified as one of the murder weapons, was normally stored on the second floor of the house. Investigators also found that Kim had been restrained using plastic ties, which were kept in an upstairs office. Additionally, the knife used in the attack came from a set in the kitchen. These findings strongly suggested that the attacker was familiar with the home and its contents. Detectives concluded that the crime was likely committed by someone close to Kim who knew her well and had unrestricted access to the house. During the autopsy, investigators discovered injuries on Kim's body that indicated she had been forced into unwanted contact with a man before her death. This led police to obtain a DNA sample from the perpetrator. Based on information provided by Derek, it was possible that other men had been in the house while he was at work, which expanded the list of potential suspects. Detectives questioned Derek and asked him to provide the names of men who might have been in the house. In addition to being a firefighter, Derek also worked as a general contractor. Some of the individuals he employed through his contracting business had stayed in his home at various times. Derek mentioned 2 individuals of interest. The first was Lance Kirkpatrick, a former co-worker who had become a friend. Derek had allowed Lance to live in his house for a few months while Lance was going through personal difficulties, but he later asked Lance to leave after discovering that Lance was using a banned substance. According to Derek, Lance was on a boat in the Atlantic Ocean the weekend the crime occurred, seemingly giving him an alibi. The second person Derek mentioned was a man named Joshua. Derek had befriended Joshua, provided him with work, and tried to help him during tough times. Derek and Kim had allowed Joshua to stay in their home, but after a falling out, Joshua moved out. Despite this, Derek occasionally hired Joshua for jobs and was planning to meet him the morning he discovered Kim's body. Derek explained that on Sunday morning, after finishing work, He had been scheduled to meet Joshua at a convenience store to pick him up for a job, but Joshua never showed up. This raised a critical question: why would Joshua miss the meeting if he needed the work? This made Joshua a key suspect. The police discovered that Joshua had a criminal history, mostly related to prohibited substances. He was taken into custody and brought to an interview room, where a detective questioned him about his activities over the weekend. Joshua claimed that he had been partying at home the entire time, including during the period when the crime was believed to have occurred. When asked whether he had a romantic relationship with Kim, he denied it but admitted that he found her very attractive and wouldn't have been opposed to having one. Toward the end of the interview, the detective informed Joshua that Kim was dead. His reaction surprised the detectives. He began crying. However, they were unsure whether his emotions were genuine or staged. A DNA sample was collected from Joshua, and he was subsequently released. Forensic analysis later confirmed that the DNA found on Kim's body did not match Joshua's, officially eliminating him as a suspect. Meanwhile, Derek provided investigators with a list of individuals familiar with his home. All of them agreed to DNA testing and were eventually ruled out as suspects. Investigators decided to revisit the crime scene, this time walking through the house with Derek. During their inspection of the kitchen, they discovered 4 remote controls from the surround sound system submerged in the sink. It appeared that someone had deliberately soaked the remotes in water, likely to erase any DNA evidence. When Derek turned on the TV, it immediately began playing an adult movie, which he claimed was not his. This raised the possibility that the perpetrator had used the TV. He then remembered that another man had recently been in the house. On Friday afternoon, approximately 12 hours before Kim's death, an employee from the company that had installed their surround sound system had visited to fix an issue with the remotes. Derek suggested that this man might have returned to the house while he was at work. Detectives quickly located the employee and began questioning him. They noticed he had cuts on his hands, but he explained that they were work-related injuries, common in his line of work. He denied any involvement in Kim's death and willingly provided a DNA sample. However, his DNA did not match the evidence found on Kim's body, further ruling him out as a suspect. The issue escalated when a police officer reviewed a routine report concerning the temporary use of a vehicle. In simple terms, the car had been reported as stolen, even though the original owner had permitted someone else to borrow it. The theft report was filed only 17 hours before Kim's death. The car's owner, a young woman, reported the theft to the police. She identified the man she had allowed to use the car as Lance Kirkpatrick. Lance never returned the vehicle. His name had surfaced earlier in the investigation when Derek mentioned individuals who had been in his house. However, Derek believed that Lance was on a boat at sea at the time of the crime. The woman who reported the car theft told detectives that she, Lance, and several others had attended a party the previous Friday night. At one point, Lance offered to go to the store to get a drink, and she let him use her car. That was the last time she saw him. Detectives began investigating whether the stolen car had been near Kim's home. During their initial canvassing of the neighborhood, a patrol officer interviewed one of Kim's neighbors. The neighbor mentioned seeing a small blue SUV in the area that day, matching the description of the stolen vehicle. Days later, detectives received new information and located surveillance footage. The video revealed a blue SUV parked outside Kim's home at 6:30 a.m. on the day she died. This footage immediately made Lance the prime suspect. To locate Lance, the police contacted the woman whose car he had stolen. While she didn't know his whereabouts, she provided information about one of his friends, Brian Kiefer. Detectives brought Brian in for questioning. They learned that Brian had also been at the party the night the SUV disappeared. He explained that he had been taking cabs all night to track down Lance, as he had also allowed Lance to borrow a car in the past. He eventually managed to locate Lance the following day. When Brian found Lance, Lance looked disheveled and had an injury to one arm. What Brian reveals to the detectives next is horrifying. Lance has confessed to Brian that he killed a woman and will go to prison. Lance admitted that the killing had been brutal and involved a beating. People confess to crimes for various reasons. One common reason is guilt. they cannot bear the weight of their actions and feel compelled to confess. Another reason could be the influence of alcohol or banned substances, which impair judgment and lead to unintended admissions. Lance provided Brian with details that only the perpetrator would know. For example, he admitted to attacking Kim with a pool stick. Lance also recounted being shot 5 times and expecting a 6th shot, which never came because the revolver only held 5 bullets. In this case, detectives had 2 potential suspects, Lance or Brian, since both knew specific details about the crime. Brian informed the detectives that Lance was hiding in the attic of his house. When arrested, Lance remained calm during the interview. He was questioned about his connection to Derek and the last time he had visited Derek's home. Lance claimed he had been there about a week to a week and a half earlier. He said that he regularly communicates, works, and understands Derek's schedule. He knew Derek would be away for 24 hours, leaving Kim home alone. Detectives questioned Lance about his relationship with Kim. He claimed there were no issues between them, but the interview abruptly ended when Lance requested an attorney and stopped answering their questions. With Lance refusing to cooperate, investigators had to find other ways to confirm he was at Kim's house. DNA testing became crucial. A sample was collected from Lance's father and compared to the DNA found on Kim's body. The results were striking. Not only did the DNA match confirm Lance as the killer, but it also ruled out Brian as a suspect. Detectives believe Lance's actions leading up to Kim's murder reveal premeditation. On the night of the crime, Lance borrowed someone else's car and returned later. He knew how to get to Kim's house, was aware of Derek's schedule, and knew Derek wouldn't be home for 24 hours, leaving Kim alone. He also knew the spare key was hidden beneath the dog statue. He retrieved the key to enter the house. At some point, Kim must have heard him, but what transpired afterward remains unclear. Despite the mounting evidence, Lance initially pleaded not guilty. Nearly 2 years after Kim's death, during the trial, Lance admitted he caused her death but insisted it was not intentional. He claimed he and Kim were friends, and she had been training him at the gym. According to Lance, they worked out 3 to 4 times per week and occasionally drank and flirted afterward, which led to occasional physical intimacy. Lance alleged that their interaction on the day of Kim's death was consensual. He admitted ownership of the adult movie DVD found at the scene. However, he claimed that after they were intimate, Kim became furious with him for introducing her husband to other women. Lance described how Kim, in her anger, grabbed a gun and began shooting at him. He said everything that followed was an act of self-defense. According to Lance, he ran and hid in the kitchen, where he had earlier left a pool stick. Fearing for his life, he grabbed the stick and swung it wildly to disarm her. He claimed to have knocked Kim unconscious, taken the gun from her, and tied her hands with plastic ties. Lance stated that he reconsidered tying her up, worrying how it would look to police. He said he used a knife to cut the ties, but during this process, Kim grabbed the knife, prompting a struggle between them. He alleged that it was during this struggle that he accidentally stabbed her. Overwhelmed with fear, he hesitated to call 911 and eventually fled the scene. He said that he had been frantic, did not know what to do, and had been scared. During cross-examination, the prosecutor highlighted inconsistencies in Lance's testimony and attempted to expose lies. In the trial's closing moments, the state pressed Lance on what punishment he believed he deserved. Lance admitted that he was guilty and added that he did not know what he wanted at that moment. In May 2015, Lance Kirkpatrick received 3 life sentences without the possibility of parole. Although he could have faced the death penalty, the jury opted for life imprisonment after hearing his mother's emotional plea to spare his life. After the verdict was announced, Derek emotionally shared about the loss of his wife, Kim. Through tears, he said that Kim was not only a firefighter's wife but also a smart, strong, and dedicated woman. He affirmed her achievements, including graduating in civil engineering from the University of North Florida and starting her own business. In an interview, he expressed disappointment with the verdict and said he had wanted the death penalty. Shanti Cooper was a devoted mother to her son, Jackson, 8, who she shared custody of with her ex-husband, Jim Cooper. After separating from Jim in 2013, Shanti was ready to begin dating again. She quickly realized that online dating had become the common way to meet people, so she decided to give it a try by creating a chat account. While exploring different profiles on the site, Shanti connected with a few men, but none impressed her quite like David Trance. David had also recently ended a year-long marriage, was looking for something fresh and exciting. Their relationship deepened through phone calls, text messages, and emails. After several months of getting to know each other, David made a significant decision to move to Orlando, Florida, to be closer to Shanti. Their relationship evolved into something more intimate, while Shanti remained committed to her son. She made sure that her time with David didn't compromise her responsibilities as a mother, always putting Jackson's well-being first and ensuring that everyone understood the importance of a healthy family dynamic. In 2015, Shanti and David relocated to Delaney Park, an upscale suburb close to downtown Orlando. This neighborhood is known for its beautiful environment and family-friendly atmosphere, attracting an affluent community. Delaney Park offers a high-quality lifestyle along with an excellent school system that delivers quality education. Its well-maintained landscapes and access to various amenities make it an attractive choice for families looking for a comfortable and safe home. In here, David bought a house for $600,000 in cash. The home is 4,000 square feet, featuring a pool, a garage, and an apartment above it. This spacious property offered them a comfortable living space with plenty of amenities. Shanti and David were excited to settle into their new house and start a new chapter in their lives. However, they soon noticed that some features of the home did not meet their expectations for the future. While they loved their new house, the upstairs bedrooms felt small and were not very functional. Facing this challenge, David and Shanti began a renovation project to turn their house into their dream home. Shanti, passionate about design and home improvement, agreed to fund the project. They hired a skilled team of contractors who completely dismantled the house to rebuild the upstairs bedrooms and create a new layout that met their vision. During the renovation, the bedrooms were unusable, so Shanti moved into the apartment above the garage. This arrangement allowed her to maintain her daily routine without interruption and provided a dedicated workspace. David, on the other hand, stayed in a makeshift area in the garage, spending quality time with their dogs. David became deeply invested in the restoration. It was no longer just a project but a vital part of his life. He spent every waking moment monitoring the work, making adjustments, ensuring every detail was carefully planned and executed. His entire focus was on the renovation, and the house began to take on a character of its own. In 2018, 3 years after starting the renovation project, there was barely any progress. The inside of the house had been completely stripped down, leaving only the bare structure. Seeking a solution, David reached out to a local home renovator known from the successful A&E reality show, Zombie House Flipping. This show features real estate investors who buy and renovate rundown homes. The show's producer contacted David and Shanti about their home in Delaney Park to see if it could be included in the next season. During the chaos of their home renovations, David and Shanti got married in 2017, which surprised many friends and family. Shanti, who is naturally private, even kept the marriage a secret from her beloved grandmother. By mid-April 2018, the show Zombie House Flipping planned to start filming at David and Shanti's home in May. However, the producer struggled to get them to discuss how the show would proceed. The producer noticed a clear contrast between David's excitement and Shanti's apparent disinterest. David was eager about the flipping series, while Shanti seemed to participate just to support her husband. The tension over their home was evident, as Shanti had invested a lot of money in the renovations, yet her name wasn't even on the trust that owned the house. Although David promised to include Shanti on the trust, he did not follow through, leading to further issues in their relationship. By the end of April 2018, David and Shanti seemed to be doing well. However, on April 24, 2018, at 3:51 p.m., David called 911 in a panic, saying he had found his wife, Shanti, in the bathtub and that she wasn't breathing. During the call, David's screams were audible as he desperately tried to explain the situation. When the police arrived at their home, they discovered Shanti had passed away in the bathtub. The area was secured, and an investigation began, while David was taken to the police station for questioning. David recounted to investigators that the morning had started normally. He said Shanti woke up between 7 and 7:30 a.m. At around 9:30 a.m., he left for a 1-hour walk, leaving Shanti at home. When he returned, he claimed he took measurements for renovations. After that, David stated he left again around noon to take their dogs to an off-leash dog park near the Orlando Executive Airport. He mentioned that he frequently visited this park to let the dogs play and enjoy the open space. He added that he hadn't spoken to Shanti before leaving the house and assumed she was in the garage apartment relaxing. David told the detectives that after returning home from the dog park, he went outside to do yard work. He worked for about 30 minutes before deciding to go inside. Once inside, he heard water coming from the bathroom, which intrigued him, so he went to check it out. As he approached, he noticed that the bathroom door was slightly open. When he pushed it open, he was shocked to find his wife, Shanti, unconscious in the bathtub, with her body partially submerged in water. In a panic, he called 911 to report what he had found. During the interview, David mentioned that Shanti had been excited about their future and the plans they had for their home. They were both looking forward to a happy life together. Although David seemed distraught and his account of finding Shanti appeared credible, the detective had doubts. There were inconsistencies in his story that raised concerns. When police officers arrived at Trant's home after David's call, they noticed that the bathroom was completely dry, which would be unusual if David had genuinely tried to save his wife from a bathtub filled with water. This detail cast doubt on the truth of David's account. The extent of Shanti's injuries contradicted David's explanation of how she fell into the tub. When her body was examined at the crime scene, it was clear she had extensive blood and bruises that couldn't be attributed to just a fall. An autopsy determined that Shanti died from blunt force trauma and strangulation, marking her death as a homicide. These inconsistencies led the detective to question David about the differences in his account. The detective questioned David about the blood found on Shanti's bed. David claimed it was from her menstrual cycle, but the amount discovered was puzzling and raised more doubts. The detectives explored various theories about why David might have killed Shanti. To provoke a response from David, the detective inquired if their ongoing home renovations had anything to do with Shanti's death, but David denied any connection. The detective also asked if Shanti was upset with David because her name was not on the house title. David insisted that Shanti had no problem with that. The detective began to suspect that Shanti's death might be linked to her life insurance policy, which would pay out $250,000 to David. During the interview, detectives asked David whether Shanti's death was an accident related to rough intercourse. He denied harming her in any way. Despite his denial, the detectives believed there was enough evidence to implicate him in Shanti's murder. They thought he had pretended to cry during the 911 call and the interview to divert suspicion. However, before David left the police station, he agreed to take a polygraph test. It was late at night, and the detectives couldn't find a polygrapher to conduct the test right away, so they allowed David to go home. Before he left, he provided DNA samples, nail clippings, and fingerprints to the detectives for analysis and comparison with evidence from the crime scene. The detectives hoped these samples would help them find more evidence linking David to Shanti's murder. Investigators who looked into the crime scene at David and Shanti's home found several notable details. Shanti had one earring still on and another on her nightstand, along with her watch, which was also found on the nightstand at the time of her murder. These details were important to the detectives because they indicated that Shanti might have been getting ready for bed when she was attacked. Additionally, her cell phone was on the nightstand, but there had been no activity on it after 11:30 p.m. on April 23, 2018. The medical examiner's report showed that Shanti had no defensive wounds, suggesting she was caught off guard by the attack. Detectives theorized that Shanti was sitting on the edge of her bed, taking off her jewelry when David attacked her from behind, leading to her death. They believed David then moved her body into the bathtub. Another important discovery was that nothing seemed to have been stolen from the house, leading the detectives to rule out robbery as a motive. However, Shanti's $155,000 engagement ring was missing. As the investigation progressed, detectives found that David's description of his happy marriage with Shanti clashed with what others believed about their relationship. David often hid Jackson's toys and only returned them when Jackson asked for them. The detectives suspected that David was using these tactics to manipulate both Shanti and her son. While searching the garage where David was sleeping, they found an unplugged refrigerator filled with children's toys. This finding reinforced the detectives' belief that David was engaged in manipulative behavior by intermittently hiding Jackson's toys. David appeared to be trying to control the emotions of Shanti and her son. After detectives executed a search warrant at Shanti and David's home, they seized the couple's computers. On Shanti's computer, they discovered notes revealing her dissatisfaction with her marriage to David. In these notes, Shanti described David as cheap, controlling, and narcissistic. She wrote that he never paid when they went out to eat, and on the rare occasions he did, he would make excuses, claiming he forgot his wallet. Shanti shared feelings of sadness and loneliness, expressing her fear. She desired to no longer be part of their life together. She indicated that her mental unhappiness was largely due to her difficult interactions with David. Additionally, the notes showed that living in a house under construction added significant stress to her life. As the detectives investigated Shanti's murder, they uncovered significant information linking David to her death. It was found that Shanti had been hospitalized for 3 days prior to her body being discovered. The detectives learned that she had expressed worries about her eating habits, telling her nanny that she could no longer tolerate spicy foods or drink alcohol. Furthermore, Shanti was experiencing rapid weight loss, which raised more suspicion among the investigators. They were confused by the toxicology tests conducted during her autopsy, which did not reveal any toxic substances in her body. Despite the lack of evidence, they began to suspect that David might have been poisoning Shanti, but they were uncertain about the specific substance responsible, as nothing was detected in the tests. David had been married before he wed Shanti, which prompted detectives to investigate his previous marriage. They found out that his first wife, Carol, suffered from health problems similar to Shanti's. David met Carol on a blind date in 1997, and they married 2 years later. The detectives were concerned about a possible link between Carol's health issues and Shanti's rapid decline in health. Shortly after their marriage, Carol began facing various health challenges, including persistent nausea, fainting spells, severe reactions to spicy foods and alcohol. Some of her close friends suggested to the detectives that David might have started poisoning her after they got married. To learn more about David's past, the detectives traveled from Florida to Minnesota in November 2018 to interview Carol in person. During the recorded interview, Carol described her struggles with chronic pain and immune system problems that remained undiagnosed. She stressed the need to understand her background to grasp the context of her health issues and mentioned that David was the one who cooked their meals during their marriage. The detectives asked Carol about the possibility that David was involved in her health issues, noting it was suspicious that both of his ex-wives faced similar health problems. Carol firmly denied any suggestion that her ex-husband had poisoned her, stating that her health issues continued even after they separated. During the investigation into Shanti's murder, detectives received a call from an employee at Club Orlando, a private men's spa. The club provided amenities like hot tubs, pools, a gym, and dark rooms for intimate activities. To become a member, individuals needed to buy a pass or membership. The employee informed the detectives that David had multiple memberships at Club Orlando and renewed them every 6 months without exception. He claimed to have seen David engaged in intimate activities with other men. Conversations with Shanti's friends revealed that she would never accept her husband having same intimate relationships. This raised the question of whether Shanti had discovered David's actions and threatened to leave him. As the investigation progressed, the detectives thoroughly reviewed all evidence, including information from an employee at Club Orlando. They sought to find out if David's spa membership and the reported intimate activity could shed light on Shanti's death. When the forensic results arrived from the state crime lab, they revealed Shanti's DNA under David's fingernails and his fingerprints were the only ones found in the bathtub. This evidence contradicted David's story, in which he stated that Shanti had accidentally fallen while entering the tub. The detectives had anticipated finding Shanti's fingerprints in the tub as well, but they were absent. On August 29, 2018, David was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, and he was denied bail. His friends were shocked by the news, as they found it hard to believe he could be responsible for Shanti's murder. They suspected that the police were looking for an easy resolution and not thoroughly investigating to find the true culprit. However, the detectives carried out a detailed investigation, following all leads regarding Shanti's murder before making the arrest. Additionally, the detectives considered Shanti's ex-husband, Jim Cooper, as a potential suspect due to their rocky divorce, which raised concerns about whether Jim might have harmed Shanti. After interviewing Jim, the detectives were able to eliminate him as a suspect based on his alibi. After David was arrested, police searched his mother's home in Orlando, where he had been living. In a suitcase, they found Shanti's missing engagement ring, which had gone missing the night she was murdered. This discovery strengthened their case against David. On April 18, 2019, almost a year after Shanti's murder, prosecutor Ryan Vecchio was meeting with Orlando Police Inspector Teresa Sprague when David's attorney called. At the time, David was represented by Robert Mandel, who called after receiving Sprague's investigative report. After some deliberation, Robert Mandel informed him that he had hired private investigator Billy Lane from Prison Break Investigations to investigate the case and that he had some papers in his home. ASA Vecchio asked him where these papers came from, and Robert informed him that they were taken from the loft apartment David was staying in at the time of the murder and that the police had missed them. He informed him that these papers had been packaged as evidence and kept by Billy Lane at his office in Lakeland, and that they planned to test the blood and DNA at some point. They had now kept these papers for 11 months without revealing them. Inside the brown evidence bag, which was marked and labeled, were bed sheets, a fitted sheet, a pillowcase, and a pair of black socks. Police also found a green cord collected from the Trance home that had been found wrapped around a wooden beam from a ladder. Although the strangulation marks were not easily visible, Shanti had an unusual linear cut on the right side of her neck with possible strangulation marks on both sides. Using gloves and magnifying glasses, investigators examined the entire cord for evidence of blood but found nothing that could be seen with the naked eye or under a magnifying glass. In July 2019, a jailhouse informant came forward with important details about a confession from David. The informant said that Shanti had found text messages on David's phone that exposed his intimate relationships with multiple men. This led to a heated argument where Shanti expressed her anger, threatened to expose him, and demanded a divorce. The informant claimed that David admitted to blacking out before he hit Shanti, which ultimately caused her death. Additionally, the informant stated he had known David before being incarcerated and had seen him at Club Orlando. He also revealed that David mentioned cambo, a toxic secretion from an Amazonian giant monkey frog used in controversial treatments. David had allegedly told the informant that this substance could be a poison that kills without leaving traces in a toxicology report. David's trial was postponed due to the global issue, which affected many legal proceedings across the country. As a result, there were significant delays in his case, lasting almost 2 years. Finally, in 2022, the trial began. However, it took an unexpected turn when both the defense and prosecution's medical experts evaluated David, determined that he was not competent to stand trial, concluding that he was experiencing severe symptoms of schizophrenia. In October 2023, after a 6-day trial, a jury found David Trance guilty, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Shanti's son, Jackson, now lives with her ex-husband, Jim Cooper. Shanti, a devoted mother and woman searching for love, stability after a difficult divorce, fell victim to David Trance's manipulative and violent betrayal. Her death at their Delaney Park home, amid a stalled renovation that symbolized the breakdown of their marriage, underscored the dangers of broken promises and hidden motives. David's sentencing in October 2023 brought justice, but it did not erase the pain endured by Shanti's son, Jackson, and her loved ones. On October 19, 2021, a cool autumn day in Wood Street, Kettering, a peaceful market town in Northamptonshire. Wood Street, with its simple homes and ghost houses, was alive with the usual sounds of everyday life: neighbors chatting, cars passing by, children returning home from school. But just after noon, that tranquility was shattered. Marta Chmielewska, a 31-year-old woman whose life was cut short, leaving her community in turmoil and her family forever altered. Northamptonshire police received a call expressing concern for a person's welfare at a residence on Wood Street. A family member had not heard from their loved one for several days and sensed that something was wrong. Officers arrived expecting to conduct a routine welfare check. They forced their way into a rented room and discovered a scene that initiated one of the town's most disturbing crime investigations. Marta was dead. The small, cluttered room was filled with secrets that would take months to uncover. What happened here? The police cordoned off the street, and neighbors watched in shock as forensic teams arrived. Residents from nearby told reporters they had never witnessed anything like this in Kettering. A neighbor expressed his disbelief. Wood Street was meant to be a safe place where nothing significant ever occurred. To reconstruct the timeline of Marta's last hours, investigators analyzed surveillance footage, which became a key piece of evidence. Detectives focused on a crucial time, the night of October 15th, just 4 days before Marta's body was discovered. So, who was she? Marta was a lively, kind, and independent woman who greatly impacted those around her. Marta grew up in Bydgoszcz, a vibrant city in northern Poland known for its charming riverside and close-knit communities. Her family considered her full of life, always smiling, and eager to help. Marta had a special ability to make people feel valued, whether she was assisting a neighbor with groceries or enjoying long conversations with friends over coffee. Her brother and sister-in-law, who later spoke at her inquest, described her as the glue of their family, someone who was always ready to help without needing to be asked. In Poland, Marta had a strong relationship with her parents, especially her father. Friends referred to her as a daddy's girl, not because she was spoiled, but because of the close and unwavering bond they had. She would call her father just to share her day. He listened with pride as he watched her grow into a confident woman. Marta also loved her brother's children and took her aunt duty seriously. She would spoil them with small gifts, play with them, or simply listen to their stories. Her family said she had a natural warmth that made everyone feel valued. At around 25 years old, Marta met Paweł Chmielewski, who was a few years her senior. Paweł was charming, confident, and had a passion for cars, particularly BMWs, which he loved to showcase. Paweł was drawn to her lively personality. Their friends noted that they seemed like an ideal couple. Marta's outgoing nature balanced Paweł's more reserved demeanor. They bonded over common interests like music, weekend trips, and dreams of a life outside of Poland. For Marta, who was always eager to explore and ambitious, Paweł appeared to be a partner who shared her aspirations for new adventures. Their relationship progressed quickly. After dating for a couple of years, they were ready to move forward. On July 29, 2016, Marta and Paweł married in a small, joyful ceremony in Bydgoszcz. The day was filled with family, laughter, and Polish traditions. Marta's family, especially her father, was delighted to see her so happy. The couple settled into their married life by renting an apartment in Bydgoszcz. For a while, it seemed like the life Marta had dreamed of, stable, loving, and aimed at a bright future. Marta and Paweł had ambitious goals. They sought more than what Bydgoszcz could provide. They wanted opportunities for personal growth, better earnings, and a chance to immerse themselves in a new culture. In 2017, they decided to take a significant step. They moved to England. They chose Kettering, a small town in Northamptonshire, partly because Marta's brother and his family already lived there. This move was a big leap for them. They packed their belongings, said farewells to their families, and arrived in the UK with optimism. Kettering, with its peaceful streets and supportive Polish community, felt like the perfect place for a fresh start. They rented a home together, explored their new surroundings, began building a new life. They enjoyed their time in Kettering by going for walks and visiting local cafes and bars. Initially, the move seemed to deepen their relationship. Marta embraced her new life in Kettering, finding a job and making friends, while Paweł also adapted to his work. They often hosted dinners for Marta's brother and his children, with Marta happily playing the role of an aunt by bringing games and treats. Social media posts from that period captured their joy, showcasing them smiling with each other and sharing captions about their new adventures. Beneath the seemingly perfect moments, problems were emerging. Powell, who had always been somewhat possessive, began to show a controlling behavior that Marta hadn't fully recognized back in Poland. He started questioning her whereabouts, the people she spent time with, and why she was making new friends. Marta, who valued her independence, struggled with being monitored. She wanted to live freely, not just exist under Powell's watch. As time passed, Powell's jealousy intensified. He was no longer just protective, he had become obsessive. While Marta was flourishing and expanding her social network within Kettering's Polish community, Powell couldn't cope. He bombarded her with texts to find out her plans and would often show up unexpectedly where she was with friends. Those around her noticed that she didn't seem like herself anymore. Her usual vibrancy had faded. While Marta shrugged it off, saying Powell was just stressed or adjusting to life in England, her close friends could see the underlying tension. Though Marta always wore a smile, her family later revealed that she had spoken to them about Powell's behavior, hinting at arguments that left her feeling trapped. The tension between Powell and Marta escalated from emotional to physical abuse. Court records later showed 3 incidents of Powell's aggression toward Marta, one in August 2020, another during Easter 2021, and a third in September 2021, just weeks before the tragedy. These incidents were not isolated, they were part of a recurring pattern. Though always a strong-willed person, Marta began to fear the man she once loved. She confided in friends that she no longer recognized Powell. She felt suffocated by his jealousy. Despite her fears, she stayed with him, perhaps hoping for change or feeling burdened by their shared past. Powell's controlling behavior extended beyond their home as he harassed Marta's friends and tried to monitor her whereabouts, even stalking her by appearing at her workplace or waiting outside places she visited. By mid-2020, their marriage was falling apart. Marta moved out and found her own place in Kettering, determined to rebuild her life. She began to share her journey of personal growth on social media. Just 5 days before her life ended, she posted a photo with a caption in Polish: "One of the worst mistakes a person can make is wasting years of life waiting for another person to change or develop." This bold statement signified her desire to move on. She started dating again, forming a new relationship with a colleague and planning a future without Powell. Powell was not willing to let Marta go. He continued to text, call, and try to involve himself in her life, even as she tried to distance herself from him. Marta repeatedly pleaded with Powell through messages, asking him to stop contacting her. During their investigation, the police found clear evidence of Powell's obsessive behavior. His messages ranged from desperate pleas to threats, showing his refusal to accept that Marta wanted to end things. Her family, especially her brother and sister-in-law, became aware of her increasing discomfort. When she visited them, still remaining a caring aunt to their children, there was a noticeable sadness in her eyes. She was trying to break free, but Powell's presence felt overwhelming. Marta wasn't just ending a marriage, she was escaping from a constraint. The process of breaking up wasn't instantaneous but involved careful, intentional actions. She began by creating distance, reducing contact, and staying away from places where Powell might be. Marta shared her plans to divorce Powell, whose name was on their official marriage registered in Poland, with her brother and sister-in-law who lived nearby. She had started gathering the necessary paperwork, which involved coordinating with lawyers back in Bydgoszcz. Additionally, Marta found support from her friends in Kettering's Polish community. They surrounded her with invitations to dinners, gym sessions, and social outings, helping her reclaim the joy that Powell had suppressed. Powell was unable to let go. His jealousy, which had already caused him pain, developed into an obsession. He refused to accept that his relationship with Marta was over and continued to reach out to her despite her efforts to distance herself. Detective Superintendent later observed that Powell's actions became increasingly desperate. He bombarded Marta with calls and texts, sometimes pleading for another chance and at other times accusing her of betrayal. When she blocked his number, he resorted to using different phones or contacting her friends to gather information about her whereabouts. He would frequently appear at her favorite cafes or hang around her workplace, hoping to encounter her unexpectedly. Marta's friends noticed that she was becoming more anxious. She often looked over her shoulder when she was out. His behavior escalated to stalking. He would follow her from a distance, watching her every move, and once trailed her from her workplace to a friend's house, only leaving after being confronted by her friend. Marta confided in her brother that she felt trapped, as if Powell was always nearby. By October 2021, Marta was doing well despite the influence of Powell. She was excitedly planning a Christmas trip to Poland to visit her father, looking forward to her mother's visit to Kettering, and enjoying a new relationship. On Friday, October 15th, she spent the evening with friends, laughing and texting as they enjoyed drinks together at a local bar. She left around 10:40 p.m., looking sharp and confident as always. However, that night, something unexpected happened. On Monday, October 18th, Marta did not show up for work, which was out of character for her. Her colleagues, who were accustomed to her punctuality, became concerned. Her brother also grew anxious when she didn't answer his calls. The situation escalated when Marta's family received a text from her phone that sounded unusual. It was overly formal and lacked her typical warmth, suggesting it was written by someone else. Her sister-in-law, feeling that something was seriously wrong, suspected that Powell might be involved due to his history of controlling behavior. On Tuesday, October 19th, Marta's sister-in-law visited Powell's rented room on Wood Street. When nobody answered the door, her anxiety grew. She called emergency service to express her concerns about Marta's safety and mentioned Powell's previous aggressive behavior. The Northamptonshire police acted quickly, sending officers to perform a welfare check at the location. What they discovered was shocking. The officers forced their way into Powell's room, breaking down the door. Inside, they found Marta's lifeless body wrapped in a blood-stained duvet. She had suffered 32 sharp force injuries, including cuts to her neck, face, shoulders, and chest, with defensive wounds on her right hand, suggesting that she had fought back. Next to her was Powell, bleeding heavily from up to 9 self-inflicted wounds on his throat. The police immediately secured the area and called for paramedics. Marta was pronounced dead at the scene, her hopes for a new life shattered. Powell, still alive, was taken to the hospital. On October 21st, after confirming that his injuries were not life-threatening, Powell Kmielewski was arrested while in his hospital bed. The detective mentioned that Powell was uncooperative during the investigation. He also noted Powell's initial denial of any previous aggression towards Marta. When detectives interviewed Powell, he remained silent and did not provide any explanation for the events that took place in his room. They questioned him about Marta's final days, her unexplained absence from work, and a suspicious text message, but he revealed nothing, adding to the mystery. Questions arose. Why did Marta visit his room that night? Had Powell lured her there? What led to such a tragic outcome? Investigators established a timeline, revealing that Marta had not been seen since October 15th, and her body had likely been in Powell's room for nearly 4 days. During this time, Powell continued with his daily routine as if nothing had happened. A text sent from Marta's phone emerged as a significant clue, indicating that Powell may have attempted to conceal his involvement. Marta's family, particularly her brother and sister-in-law, were devastated. They had warned her to avoid Powell, but none could have anticipated the depths of his desperation. The investigation into Marta's death relied heavily on tangible evidence, with the security camera footage from Wood Street and surrounding areas being the most telling. Northamptonshire police thoroughly searched CCTV and Ring doorbell recordings, which provided a disturbing glimpse into Marta's final moments. On Friday, October 15th, 2021, Marta spent the evening at her friend's house on Woodland Court, enjoying herself and having a good time. She was texting, laughing, and sharing flirtatious messages with a colleague she was dating. At the same time, she received persistent messages from Powell, who was urging her to come over to his place and even asked her to bring pizza. The previous day, she had told him off in a message and requested that he leave her alone. Despite this, Powell continued to text her and reached out to a mutual friend to find out if Marta was at here. Upon confirming her location, he decided to act. At 10:42 p.m., Marta left her friend's house, walking alone along Wood Street towards Rockingham Road. Security footage showed her walking confidently, dressed for a night out and carrying a small bag. However, just a few minutes later, around 10:45 p.m., cameras revealed Powell leaving his rented room and heading towards Bath Road, intentionally moving to intersect her path. Powell was recorded leaving his home on Wood Street to find Marta, as noted by Northamptonshire police based on footage from near Wilson Terrace. The video showed a struggle between them. Marta appeared to be walking normally at first but then seemed to resist when Powell grabbed her arm. She stumbled and briefly fell, coughing and unsteady on her feet. Audio from a Ring doorbell captured her labored coughs along with Powell's cold command, "Come on, not far now. Can you hear me?" He was seen forcefully guiding her, at one point lifting her in a bear hug as she struggled to walk. By 10:56 p.m., the low-quality footage showed them entering his house, and that was the last time anyone but Powell saw Marta alive. Inside that room, the situation became increasingly unclear, but Powell's interactions with Marta's phone revealed important information. At 11:01 p.m., just 5 minutes after they arrived, Powell took a photo of Marta lying on the floor. It's uncertain if she was already injured at that time. Approximately 90 minutes later, around 12:30 a.m. on October 16th, he captured images of messages between Marta and her new boyfriend on her phone that confirmed her new relationship. Powell's fixation on Marta's new life, especially her relationship with her new boyfriend, drove his actions. He didn't just spy on her, he went further by using Marta's phone to send messages in an effort to hide his involvement. He texted her friends and family, imitating her writing style to create the illusion that she was still alive. One particular message sent to her family was noticeably formal, unlike Marta's usual warm and casual tone, which raised suspicions. These messages were part of Powell's strategy to delay any suspicion and buy himself time while he remained in the room with Marta's body for nearly 4 days. Marta was last seen alive at 10:56 p.m. on October 15th, when she entered Powell's room. Detectives suspect she died shortly after, likely before midnight, based on a photo Powell took at 11:01 p.m. and the extent of her 32 stab wounds. The injuries to her neck were determined to be the cause of death in the autopsy. The following day, he used Marta's phone to send messages to her male contacts, pretending to be her and attempting to entice them into intimate encounters. On October 17th, just 2 days after Marta's death, surveillance cameras captured him casually walking to a nearby shop to buy 6 cans of beer and a soft drink before returning to his room. He showed no signs of grief, seamlessly blending into the daily life of Kettering while Marta's body lay covered in a blood-stained duvet. This footage was incriminating, revealing a man capable not only of murder but also of continuing his life as if nothing had happened. Powell was arrested on October 21st after his condition stabilized. He faced murder charges, and the evidence against him, CCTV footage, phone records, and forensic analysis, was substantial. Prosecutors presented his motive as jealousy and an inability to accept Marta's new life. He had expressed to friends that he couldn't bear the thought of anyone else being intimate with her, a feeling that ultimately led to his final act. By March 3, 2022, when Powell Kmielewski appeared in Northampton Crown Court and confessed to murdering Marta, the case had already captured the attention of the Kettering community and beyond. His guilty plea eliminated the need for a lengthy trial, which spared Marta's family from the pain of recounting every detail in court. The focus then shifted to a sentencing hearing on September 6, 2023, aimed at determining Powell's punishment and allowing Marta's loved ones to express their grief. Marta's brother and sister-in-law sat in the gallery, visibly heartbroken as they awaited the verdict on the punishment Powell would face for taking her life. The prosecution, represented by Northamptonshire Police and the Crown Prosecution Service, presented a strong argument for a tough sentence. They claimed that Powell's actions were not just a momentary impulse but rather the result of an ongoing pattern of control and obsession. They highlighted the 7 defensive wounds on Marta's right hand as evidence that she fought for her life. The prosecution also referenced Powell's history of domestic abuse, mentioning incidents from August 2020, Easter 2021, and September 2021 to illustrate his increasing aggression. In 2020, he confronted Marta at her workplace on Rockingham Road about her connections with other men, forcibly took her phone to search for evidence of infidelity, then punched her multiple times, resulting in bruises on her back and face, along with a cut lip. Although the police were contacted and Marta initially gave a statement, she later retracted it. Powell offered an apology to his wife through a community resolution process. Marta left him in September that year, but the harassment persisted with continued phone calls and messages. In Easter 2021, he became aggressive during a family party, pushing her. 3 months before her death, he found Marta at the pub, grabbed her arm, and threatened her. The next month, he was reported for harassment. Marta lived in constant fear, telling friends that she was afraid Powell might kill her. Despite her efforts to escape, like moving out, planning to divorce him in Poland, and pleading with him to leave her alone, he continued to stalk and manipulate her, even sending deceptive texts from her phone to avoid raising suspicion. The prosecution highlighted Powell's lack of remorse, noting that he remained with Marta's body for almost 4 days. Powell initially denied his history of abuse while attempting to manipulate the court proceedings. They urged for a life sentence with a lengthy minimum term, arguing that Powell's actions deserved no mercy. On the other hand, Powell's defense team had limited options due to his guilty plea and the strong evidence against him. With the help of an interpreter, they acknowledged the seriousness of his crime but requested a shorter minimum term. They claimed that Powell's actions were impulsive, driven by emotional distress from his divorce and Marta's new relationship. The defense argued that he was deeply affected by the breakup, citing his self-inflicted wounds as signs of remorse or mental anguish. They contended that, although the attack was horrific, it was not premeditated and that Powell's guilty plea had spared the family from a trial. However, these arguments were weak compared to the prosecution's evidence of Powell's calculated stalking and the brutality of the attack. On September 6, 2023, Judge Herbert announced the verdict. Powell Chmielewski was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum term of 18 years and 4 months. The judge directly addressed Powell, stating, "It was a prolonged and violent attack driven entirely by anger and jealousy." He stressed Marta's fear, noting, "The evidence clearly shows that Marta did not feel safe with you and feared you might kill her." The judge cautioned that Powell might never be released, as his eligibility for parole would be based on the parole board's evaluation of his risk to the public. This means that at 40 years old, Powell would be at least 58 before he could apply for parole, reflecting the serious nature of his crime. Marta's family felt the deep impact of the case. Her brother and sister-in-law, who were present at the sentencing, shared a moving statement through Northamptonshire Police, expressing that no sentence could alleviate their suffering. However, they found a small sense of closure in knowing that Powell was held accountable for his actions. Marta Chmielewski's life, marked by warmth, resilience, and a pursuit of freedom, was tragically cut short by Powell Chmielewski's jealousy and violence, leaving her family and the Kettering community in profound grief. The sentencing of Powell to life imprisonment with a minimum of 18 years and 4 months brought a measure of justice, though it could never fill the void left by Marta's absence. Her story serves as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of domestic abuse and the strength of those who fight for their independence, ensuring her memory endures as a call for awareness and change. On a seemingly ordinary evening in Bolingbrook, Illinois, an unimaginable event occurred. A woman was discovered dead in her bathtub. Her hair was wet, and there was a severe gash at the back of her head. Initially, it appeared to be a tragic accident, perhaps a slip and fall, but as investigators delved deeper, inconsistencies began to emerge. The most shocking revelation: the individual who may hold the key to this mystery was someone dedicated to protecting the community. What really transpired that night, and how did this case evolve into a startling tale of deception, manipulation, and betrayal? Kathleen Savio was born on June 13, 1963, in Glendale Heights, Illinois. She was the youngest of 4 siblings, was raised by her parents, Henry Jerry Savio and Mary Savio. When Kathleen was just 2 years old, her parents divorced. Later, her mother remarried, and the family moved to a different city in Illinois. Despite financial difficulties during her childhood, Kathleen was determined to create a better future for herself. She focused on her education, eventually became an accountant. Friends and acquaintances described Kathleen as warm, friendly, and charismatic, with a unique talent for connecting with others. At 20 years old, she went on a life-changing blind date with Drew Peterson. He seemed charming and was initially a great match for her. Drew worked as a police officer in the Metropolitan Area Narcotics Squad in Illinois, a job that brought him respect and authority. Drew was born on January 5, 1954, in Bolingbrook, a suburb of Chicago, and was raised by his strict parents. Drew was an older brother to two siblings. In high school, he stood out as an athlete and was known for his competitive nature. During his teenage years, he started his first serious relationship with Carol Brown. After graduating, Drew enlisted in the U.S. Army in 1974 and married Carol that same year. He was discharged in 1976 and the following year joined the police force in his hometown. Within a year, he moved to an undercover role in the Metropolitan Area Narcotics Squad, where he gained recognition. By the age of 25, he was named Police Officer of the Year. However, his personal life was troubled. Despite having two children, his marriage to Carol ended in 1980 when she found out he was unfaithful. Carol received custody of their kids. Known for his arrogance, Drew often boasted to friends about how easily he attracted women. In 1981, he met Victoria "Vicky" Connolly, and they married in 1982. Their marriage lasted almost 10 years until Victoria decided to divorce him in 1992, citing ongoing domestic abuse as the main reason. This claim was later supported by her daughter, Lisa Ward, who lived with them from ages 8 to 18. She reported physical and psychological abuse from Drew. Until later, a troubling rumor from their marriage involved an incident after they purchased a bar together. One night, after leaving the bar, Victoria was in a car accident that required surgery. Some sources suggested that Drew might have tampered with her brakes, but no solid evidence came to light. During his marriage to Victoria, Drew began an affair with Kathleen Savio, who was unaware of his marriage. To Kathleen, Drew appeared to be the perfect partner. He showered her with gifts and affection, took her on trips, promised her a stable future. Moved by his attention, she quickly fell in love with him. When Drew eventually told her he was going through a divorce, he portrayed his wife as a banned substance addict and claimed he could no longer handle the situation. Their romance accelerated rapidly, leading to their engagement just 6 months after their first date. On May 3, 1992, shortly after Drew finalized his divorce, they got married. Over the next 2 years, Kathleen gave birth to their 2 children, but their relationship began to change. While she focused on raising their family, Drew sought excitement outside the home. What began as a loving relationship turned unhealthy. Drew's charming exterior vanished, revealing a controlling and abusive nature. At first, his mistreatment was verbal. He insulted Kathleen's appearance, calling her unattractive and making hurtful comments about her weight. As time passed, his behavior became increasingly harmful, trapping Kathleen in a marriage that was far from the fairy tale she had imagined. Drew's aggression intensified. One day, Kathleen, feeling frustrated and tired from his continual absence and lack of support with their children, confronted him. What began as a heated argument quickly escalated into violence. Drew grabbed her arm and pushed her into a table, causing her to sustain a head injury and multiple bruises. The injuries were serious enough for her to go to the emergency room. Although the hospital recorded the incident, Drew publicly denied any wrongdoing. In a televised interview, he claimed that, as a police officer, he needed to act differently than an ordinary citizen to protect his job. Kathleen decided to stay in her marriage despite the challenges. Meanwhile, Drew turned his attention to a new relationship with a much younger woman named Stacy and Callis, who was nearly 30 years his junior. He was even bringing Stacy to the home that he shared with Kathleen and their children. On at least one occasion, he spent the night with her in the basement while his family slept upstairs. Stacy, born on January 20, 1984, in Downers Grove, Illinois, graduated high school early and began working as a receptionist at a local hotel, where she and Drew first met. For a time, Kathleen was unaware of the affair, but that changed in October 2001 when she received an anonymous letter that revealed Drew's involvement with 19-year-old Stacy. Although Kathleen's marriage had been struggling, this news devastated her. She confronted Drew, who denied the affair. Distraught, Kathleen called her sister, crying as she shared that not only had Drew cheated on her, but he had also physically assaulted her during an argument by throwing her against the refrigerator. By mid-2002, Drew had moved out of their home and into a new house just a few blocks away, which many viewed as a deliberate act to provoke Kathleen. The divorce was quite tense as Kathleen fought over custody, child support, and her share of Drew's pension. However, Drew was unwilling to compromise. Kathleen was a strong and devoted mother who refused to back down easily. Their disputes escalated, leading to the police being called to her home at least 18 times, each report documenting domestic arguments. One particularly alarming incident occurred on July 5, 2002. According to the police report, Drew broke glass in the house and then forced Kathleen to sit on the staircase for hours while he stood over her, brandishing a knife and threatening her life. Kathleen felt increasingly unsafe, especially since Drew was a police officer in the same department that handled her complaints. As a result, her reports were often dismissed as typical domestic issues, and no serious action was taken against him. Fearing for her safety, Kathleen sought legal protection. On November 14, 2002, she wrote a letter to the state's assistant prosecutor describing Drew's worsening violence, urgently requested an emergency protection order before it was too late. She warned that Drew knew how to exploit the system and that she feared for her children's safety as well as her own. Despite the urgency of her message, her requests were ignored. Kathleen felt helpless, alone with her children, and trapped in a perilous situation. Drew officially married Stacy on October 18, 2003, shortly after finalizing his divorce. At 49 years old, he married a 19-year-old. Soon after, Stacy gave birth to their first child. Initially, she seemed happy in her role as a stepmother, even though Drew's eldest child was not much younger than she was. Their life looked ideal. They traveled often, hosted extravagant parties, and portrayed themselves as a loving couple despite their significant age difference. However, the initial bliss did not last. Drew's controlling behavior re-emerged, and he became obsessive towards Stacy, monitoring her phone, tracking her movements, and making unfounded accusations. Then, on the night of Monday, March 1, 2004, a worried neighbor knocked on Kathleen's doors several times without getting a response. Concerned, the neighbor decided to check inside and made a shocking discovery. Savio's nude body was found in the bathtub in the master bedroom of the Pheasant Chase Drive mansion. Naturally, Drew became the primary suspect, but he had a solid alibi. He was home with Stacy. He also stated that, as agreed, he had spent the previous weekend with his children and returned them to Kathleen on Sunday. Forensic investigators found no signs of forced entry or struggle in the home. Although Kathleen's autopsy showed bruises as well as a large, unexplained gash on her scalp, there were no defensive injuries. Authorities quickly classified her death as an accidental drowning without conducting a more thorough investigation. A significant detail was overlooked: the bathtub was completely dry when her body was discovered, raising further suspicions. The lead detective in the case was a close friend of Drew's, and his so-called interrogation of Drew resembled more of a casual chat between friends than an official inquiry. Stacy, supporting her husband, confirmed his alibi by claiming they had spent the entire weekend at home with their children. Kathleen's family was heartbroken by her unexpected death. Just days later, they held a touching memorial, honoring her as a devoted mother and a kind person. Shortly after this, Drew was awarded full custody of the two children he had with Kathleen. Stacy officially adopted them, creating the impression of a happy blended family. However, the facade of a perfect marriage soon crumbled. As time went on, Drew's controlling behavior became increasingly evident. By 2007, Stacy was fed up with his oppressive ways and seriously contemplated divorce. Then, on October 28 of that year, she disappeared without any explanation. Her sudden vanishing shocked her family, as Stacy had never shown any signs that she would willingly leave without informing anyone. Stacy's family began a desperate search for her and refused to give up until she was found. In contrast, Drew displayed little concern throughout the search process. During interviews, he made dismissive and sarcastic comments, implying that Stacy was merely enjoying attention and likely out dancing or with another man. Stacy's family suspected Drew might be involved, especially since she had recently told him she wanted a divorce, something he was unwilling to accept. As their suspicions grew, Drew tried to change the narrative by claiming that Stacy had changed a lot since her sister's death in 2006. He stated that she had been struggling emotionally and receiving treatment for depression. However, rather than clearing his name, these claims only heightened the investigators' concerns. Authorities began to question whether Kathleen's death was really accidental or if something more sinister was at play. Just weeks after Stacy went missing, both the Illinois State Police and the FBI reopened the investigation into Kathleen's death. In November 2007, Kathleen's body was exhumed for a second autopsy, which revealed findings that contradicted the original report. Forensic experts discovered clear signs of a struggle, indicating that she had fought for her life. As a result, Drew becomes the prime suspect in both the death of his third wife and the disappearance of his fourth wife. Instead of staying out of the spotlight, he actively sought media attention, appearing on talk shows and making arrogant, sarcastic comments as if he relished the notoriety. In January 2008, the case took a surprising turn when Drew's brother, Thomas Morphy, came forward with important information. He claimed that he helped Drew remove a large blue container from their house around the time Stacy disappeared. Several neighbors backed up his account, stating they had seen Drew with the container. Additionally, Thomas disclosed that he had assisted Drew in making a phone call from Stacy's phone, which made it look like she was at the airport shortly after her vehicle was found abandoned there. As the search for Stacy continued, the investigation into Kathleen's death advanced. On February 21, 2008, her death was officially reclassified from an accident to a homicide. About a year later, Drew was arrested as the main suspect. His legal team argued that they had a strong defense due to the absence of physical evidence, such as fingerprints, DNA, or eyewitness accounts linking him directly to the crime. As the trial progressed, accusations arose against the police department, with many claiming that Drew, having been a sergeant there, received preferential treatment and that the initial investigation was mishandled. This raised serious concerns about the integrity of law enforcement, suggesting issues of corruption and cover-ups. Exposing institutional bias alone did not establish Drew's guilt in Kathleen's murder. The prosecution needed a significant breakthrough. That turning point came when the lead prosecutor executed a strategic legal move that transformed the case. On May 31, 2012, Drew Peterson's trial began. The first witness was Kathleen's sister, Susan M. Savio. Her testimony deeply affected everyone in the courtroom as she recounted that Kathleen had confided in her about Drew threatening to kill her and make it look like an accident to avoid suspicion. Next, Neil Scorey, a pastor and marriage counselor who had worked with Stacy, took the stand. He testified that Stacy had privately expressed her concerns that Drew was responsible for Kathleen's death. He recalled that Stacy once woke up in the middle of the night to find Drew missing around the time Kathleen was believed to have died. When Drew returned, he allegedly asked Stacy to lie to the police and provide him with an alibi. Further unsettling details emerged in court, including the fact that Drew had been present during Stacy's police interview, suggesting that he had pressured her to protect him. Additionally, the attorney who represented Stacy during her divorce revealed that Stacy had reached out to him just days before her disappearance, seeking legal advice about leaving Drew and made it clear she believed he had killed Kathleen. Prosecutors claimed that Drew killed Kathleen out of fear that their divorce would leave him broke. For 3 weeks, jurors heard from 44 witnesses who shared disturbing accounts of Kathleen's case. One friend mentioned that Kathleen was so scared of Drew that she kept a knife under her bed for protection. After considering all the evidence, which was mostly circumstantial and based on witness statements, the jury, made up of 7 men and 5 women, deliberated for about 14 hours. Before the jury's decision was announced, Drew shouted that he was innocent. This caused Kathleen's brother to retaliate, accusing Drew of Kathleen's murder. security had to step in to remove him from the courtroom. Ultimately, on September 6, 2012, Drew Peterson convicted of murdering Savio. On February 21, 2013, sentencing him to 38 years in prison with no chance of parole. Though he appeared calm during the trial, Drew's attitude changed in the following days. He directed his anger at the prosecutor who helped convict him. The prosecutor, however, remained unshaken and suggested that there might be further legal actions regarding Stacy's disappearance. Tensions escalated within Drew's legal team as his lead attorney filed an appeal, claiming that the original defense team had mishandled the trial. They argued that Drew was pressured into starting a media campaign before the trial, which ultimately harmed his defense. They also criticized the choice to call Stacy's divorce attorney as a witness, a decision that proved disastrous. Despite Drew's numerous attempts to overturn the verdict, the ruling remained intact. Kathleen achieved justice, but the fate of Stacy continued to be a perplexing mystery, with many believing that Drew Peterson held the key to the answers. While serving his sentence, Drew faced a new and shocking allegation. He was recorded in prison discussing a plan to arrange a murder for hire against the prosecutor who had led his case. He offered money to another inmate in exchange for carrying out the attack. In May 2016, he was found guilty of solicitation of murder and solicitation of murder for hire. He was subsequently sentenced to an additional 40 years in prison. Over time, Drew has maintained his innocence and persistently sought to appeal his conviction, arguing that the testimonies used during his trial violated his constitutional rights. In 2024, a significant legal development occurred when Drew's public defender requested a psychological evaluation to pursue a new trial. The judge instructed the county to conduct and finance the evaluation for Drew, who is now 70 years old. After a mandatory 30-day assessment period, the results showed that he was mentally competent to stand trial. At the same time, Drew's former attorney faced legal issues of his own, as he was charged with contempt of court. This situation arose when he allegedly breached a gag order by discussing the case in a nationally televised interview. During this interview, he claimed to have information that could clarify the circumstances surrounding Stacy's case. Although the lawyer denied the allegations, the judge reaffirmed the gag order, prohibiting him from publicly addressing the case. In the same year, Drew's eldest son, Stephen Paul Peterson, who became a police officer like his father, spoke out. He referred to Drew as his hero, highlighting that his father had always supported him and his brother. However, he confessed that dealing with the circumstances of Drew's conviction was extremely painful, making it hard for him to reconcile the loving father he had known for 36 years with the man accused of such terrible crimes. As for Drew's numerous appeals, none had been successful by that time. Stacy remained missing, and her family continued to hope that her body would eventually be found. They firmly believed that Drew was responsible for her disappearance and should be held accountable. This case generated significant public debate throughout the United States because of its many concerning elements. At its center was a police officer, an individual committed to protecting the public, who instead posed a threat to those around him. The chilling saga of Kathleen Savio's murder and Stacy Peterson's disappearance revealed a harrowing tale of abuse, manipulation, and betrayal orchestrated by Drew Peterson, a police officer entrusted with public safety. While Kathleen's justice was secured through a hard-fought conviction, Stacy's fate remains an unresolved mystery, leaving her family in anguished hope for answers. This case, marked by institutional failures and Peterson's brazen defiance, underscores the devastating consequences of unchecked power and the enduring pursuit of truth that continues to honor the memories of Kathleen and Stacy. The will to live is not something everyone possesses. While some people remain stuck in their problems, a little girl in desperate need of help is fighting against a dangerous psychopath. But what can a child do against someone who has taken many lives? In December 1999, Crystal Searles was just 10 years old. She was known to be hardworking and humble. Despite her youth, she had already faced significant hardships. Unfortunately, what lay ahead for her was worse than anything she had ever experienced. Crystal and her brother were staying with friends of the Harris family in Del Rio, Texas, while waiting for their mother and younger sisters to move from Kansas. December 30, 1999, seemed like a normal day filled with preparations for the new year. But for some, the arrival of the new millennium was about to take a tragic turn. Mark was Crystal's brother, and they both grew up in Kansas. At that time, Mark was 7 years old and Crystal was 10. They spent the day with the children of the Harris family. Crystal and Mark were welcomed by the Harris family for a while. Crystal quickly adapted by helping with household chores and forming close bonds with everyone. During the New Year holidays, Crystal looked forward to reuniting with her mother and sisters. However, she and Mark struggled to get along, likely due to their age difference and varying interests. The Harris family had several children, with Sean as the eldest, followed by Justin, Lori, and Katie. Sean had already moved out but was planning to return for the holidays. That night, the Harris family planned to go into town to pick up Sean and the 2 older kids. The result is that Crystal, Katie, and Mark would be left alone at home without any adults around. The house was situated in a remote area, surrounded by nature, with few neighbors nearby. That night, little Mark was scared of the dark, wanted to sleep in the same room as the older girls, Crystal and Katie. However, they pushed him away because they wanted to share a secret. Upset, Mark had to go to the next room. It took him 2 hours to calm down and fall asleep. The next morning, sunlight poured into the room, waking Mark up. The curtains had been pulled back. When he opened his eyes, a strange woman was there. She handed him some clothes, urged him to get ready to leave. When Mark stepped out, he was shocked to find a large pool of blood on the floor, with stains and splatters on the walls and door. The floor was almost completely covered in it. People around him were crying and panicking, but Mark couldn't understand what was going on. He looked for his sister but couldn't find her or Katie. The adults ignored his questions about the girls. When detectives arrived at the house, they were immediately struck by the amount of blood present. In the room where the girls had spent the night, they found 13-year-old Katie lying on the floor, unresponsive. It was clear from her severe injuries that she had fought for her life but had ultimately succumbed to a fatal cut to her throat, resulting in blood loss. In contrast, Crystal was fortunate to have survived the attack by an unknown assailant, although she was in critical condition. At around 6 a.m. on December 31, 1999, Pam Searles, Crystal's mother, received a call. They asked for her permission to perform an emergency operation because her daughter was in critical condition with a severe throat injury. Pam was in shock and struggled to understand what had happened. Crystal quickly became an important witness for the police, even as she battled for her life in a local hospital's operating room. After a successful surgery, she was placed on life support, including a ventilator, as she was unable to breathe independently. When her mother arrived at the hospital, Crystal's condition had improved. The surgeon had managed to save her life, but her trachea and vocal cords had sustained serious injuries. Despite her state, Crystal's main concern was whether her friend Katie had survived. However, Pam did not have the strength to tell her that her friend had died. As soon as Crystal woke up after the surgery, she wanted to speak to the police to tell them what had happened. According to Crystal, she and her friend had gone to bed quite late. She had no idea what time it was when she was awakened by a scream. Raising her head from the top bunk, she saw a man with disheveled hair, a thick beard, and dark, angry eyes standing in front of her. She immediately noticed that Katie was bleeding and that this stranger had a knife in his hand. He covered Katie's mouth with his hand, slowly cutting her throat. The attacker hadn't noticed Crystal at first and was about to leave, but when Katie fell to the floor and began to make death rattles, Crystal recoiled involuntarily when their eyes met. Turning around one last time, the criminal spotted Crystal on the top bunk. Terrified, she tried to climb down to escape through the open window. With a quick movement, he caught up with her and cut her throat as well. Then the stranger disappeared from the house. Despite her injury, Crystal was able to crawl. She climbed down from the top bunk with difficulty and headed for the bedroom door. On the way, she bumped into her friend, who was still making hoarse sounds, and then went quiet. Crystal lay down next to Katie, hugged her, and wanted to tell her that everything would be fine, but she couldn't. In that moment, she realized that she was mute. The criminal had severed her vocal cords. She was unable to utter a single word clearly. Suddenly, Crystal realized that she needed to ask for help. The phone was useless in her case, so she wrote a note asking for help and decided to get to the neighbors. With her throat cut, Crystal crawled out onto the terrace of the house, dressed in her pajamas and without shoes, but she saw a light in the distance, realized that it was her goal. Crystal stood up with difficulty and walked slowly toward the light. When she reached the neighboring house, which was a good distance away, she began to pound on the door. Then she heard a man's voice asking who was there. Unable to speak, she continued to knock as hard as she could until he opened the door. The neighbors saw the bloody girl, read the note, and called the police. Crystal's brother was unharmed because he had been in another room where the attacker had not entered. Based on the words of Crystal, a composite sketch was created. A check of the police database revealed several potential suspects with various convictions. The next day, the police returned to Crystal and presented several photographs for identification. Crystal confidently pointed to the image of Tommy Lynn Sells, who immediately became the prime suspect. At that time, he was in Del Rio, having arrived relatively recently. Up until that point, he had committed only minor offenses, but Crystal recognized that empty, cruel look instantly. The detectives decided to investigate him. When Tommy's door was knocked on early in the morning, he was informed that he was under arrest for murder. He came out to meet the police and immediately stated that he was glad he was finally caught because he was tired of committing these acts. Initially, the police did not grasp the alarming significance of Tommy's words. He told them about the murder weapon, which turned out to be a 30-centimeter butcher knife. He had used it often over the years, and the blade had been sharpened regularly. It had simply broken. The man had thrown the knife in the bushes near his home, where it was found with traces of blood. Tommy was taken to the county sheriff's office. From the beginning, he willingly cooperated with the authorities, confessed without hesitation to the murder of Katie and the attempted murder of Crystal. He was surprised when he learned about the surviving girl. Tommy agreed to reconstruct the events in the house where he had killed Katie. His behavior seemed odd considering the terrible crimes being discussed. At the same time, he was clearly sealing his own fate by cooperating with the authorities. Tommy began to recount the details of the night of the crime. He explained that as soon as he approached the house, he noticed the open window, which made it easier for him to enter. He walked down the hallway, saw different children sleeping in various rooms, and then chose one with a bunk bed. He entered quietly, approached the lower bunk. Tommy began stabbing and cut Katie's throat. Before leaving, he noticed the second girl and also cut her throat. The detectives managed to find out he had been friends with the Harris family for a long time. It was suspected that, based on this relationship, he had planned the attack on Katie in advance, likely intending to abuse her. Tommy did indeed abuse Katie first, then killed her because he was thirsty for blood. Before arriving at the Harris house, he had intended to break into a trailer where 6 people lived. He knew them and wanted to kill them all, but he feared they might fight back, so he changed his mind at the last moment, sought easier prey. He had heard that the Harris family was hosting a couple of children and that they might be alone that night. Crystal's mother felt guilty for not being there for her daughter during such a terrible time in her life, but she had been forced to settle various issues before moving. To better understand what had happened, she expressed a desire to visit the crime scene. Upon arriving, she witnessed a scene that resembled a horror movie, with an entire floor covered in blood. Crystal had run for help with her last strength, leaving bloody handprints on the wall. Immediately after his arrest, Tommy behaved quite calmly. He was being transported to prison when he shocked the law enforcement officers by suggesting that they probably wanted to know about all the other murders he had committed. This surprised all the police officers, especially since they hadn't even asked him about other possible crimes before. Detectives usually avoid allowing journalists to be present during interrogations, as this could lead to important information being widely publicized and having unpredictable consequences. However, this time, the situation was serious. There were numerous murders involved. Ultimately, the decision was made to allow the media to participate in the interviews, which would quickly spread Tommy's story across the country, potentially help find people who had also survived his attacks and could identify their assailant. A reliable journalist, trusted by the police, was chosen for this purpose and was able to convey Tommy's story clearly, without distortion. The journalist sat in the interrogation room for hours, listening to Tommy recount stories of his life, describing his journeys from state to state while killing men, women, and children without remorse. He was a cold-blooded madman, recounting real bloody scenes as if they were made-up campfire horror stories. Among the most vivid childhood memories that Tommy shared was his father's phrase, "Dead men don't talk." From the start, he doubted that any of his victims could have survived the attack. In his opinion, Crystal was very lucky, but it was unlikely that anyone else had been so fortunate. Even at this stage, the extent of his madness was unclear. Over the next 9 months, he communicated regularly with detectives in the presence of a journalist. In total, he described 22 murders that he committed with his own hands. There were other unconfirmed incidents that could not be verified. Clearly, many more crimes had been committed. This man's words were corroborated by his knife, which he had used all these years to take the lives of innocents. The blade had been sharpened so many times that it became very thin and resembled a slate. The butcher knife didn't even look like a kitchen tool, it resembled something from a torture chamber. After all these events, surgeries, discharge, talking to detectives and journalists, Crystal was gradually recovering. She was shocked by the extent of her injuries. A long scar remained on her throat after the surgery, and she cried when she saw it for the first time. Her mother took her to Kansas, away from the scene of the massacre, but they still had to return to Texas for her to testify against the serial killer. 9 months had passed since the murder and attempted murder. Tommy's stories about other crimes had ended. Crystal was 11 years old by this point. She managed to partially recover, but only physically. Psychologically, she continued to struggle with the consequences of the horrors she had witnessed, as well as the cruelty of the madman she now had to testify against in court. She was the main witness for the prosecution. From the very beginning, the situation was tense. Crystal had not seen the criminal since the night he slit her friend's throat before her eyes, almost killing her. It was hard for everyone caught up in Tommy's villainy. During the hearings in Texas, Crystal was taken in by Texas Ranger Johnny Allen, who was a family man with 2 children at the time. Crystal met their daughters, hoping that this would help distract her from her situation. According to the family, Crystal would wake up screaming in the middle of the night, thrashing around in bed as if trying to escape from someone. Everyone knew this was what her nightmares were about, but the girl was determined not to give up. Tommy's lawyer also had a difficult task ahead of him. He knew all too well that his client was a dangerous serial criminal who had taken dozens of lives for no reason. His only strategy was to try to avoid capital punishment. He was not going to deny the charges. Despite the adults' concerns, Crystal even spoke enthusiastically about the upcoming meeting with Tommy. She understood that now he would not have a chance to attack her, so she was not afraid. She simply wanted to achieve a fair punishment for this monster. Crystal comforted herself with the thought that she was the reason he was caught and that she had stopped the chain of murders at his hands. According to the prosecutor's office, if Crystal had not miraculously survived that attack and pointed out Tommy, he would have continued his bloody spree across the United States. Who knows how many more people could have died from his knife? The courageous schoolgirl thought that by doing this, she was pursuing justice and vengeance for her friend who had been killed. Up until the day of her testimony, Crystal felt very inspired. That morning, she woke up to find her mother so worried that she was in tears. She asked her mother to calm down so that she wouldn't be distracted from this important moment that could help them stop the serial killer. During the hearings, Crystal once again demonstrated her fortitude. She walked to the stand when called to testify, passing mere centimeters away from the criminal. Although she could have chosen to enter through a specially prepared secret door for such cases, she expressed a desire to walk past the assailant who had cut her throat. She stated that she was not afraid of the man. At one point, however, her determination wavered slightly. While Crystal was on the stand, Tommy displayed no panic, nervousness, or tears. He didn't even look at her while she spoke and answered questions. Crystal confirmed that it was this man who had slit her and her friend's throats, pointing at him. Conversely, he appeared to be impatiently waiting for a decision, which made Crystal increasingly nervous. Eventually, the tension overwhelmed her. She burst into tears and could no longer speak. The court took a forced 15-minute break to allow the prosecution's main witness to compose herself. After the break, Crystal returned to her previous resolve, showing the jury her scar across her throat, a mark that the defendant had left on her body for the rest of her life. Then there was a demonstration of the attack. Crystal lay on a makeshift table that was meant to represent a bed, showing how the attacker had stabbed her with a knife. This allowed the jury to comprehend the scale of the cruelty and horror that the child had endured. The girl illustrated how she had tried to cover her throat with her hands, having witnessed what Tommy had done to her friend, not wanting to share the same fate. Perhaps this instinct is what saved her from a fatal hemorrhage that could have killed her within minutes. The courage of the 11-year-old schoolgirl was acknowledged by her lawyer. Instead of cross-examining her, the defense attorney praised her and did not ask a single question. At that moment, it became clear that even a serial killer's defense attorney was on the side of the victims. No one expected the trial to be so short, especially in such a high-profile case. However, the jury returned with a verdict after about an hour of deliberation. They found the defendant guilty of first-degree murder and attempted first-degree murder. Now only one question remained: would he receive life in prison or the death penalty? The final stage of the trial was set. No one suspected that the brave little girl sitting in front of everyone actually harbored other secrets. Mark Searles, Crystal's father, believed he understood why his daughter had such a strong, determined character, which enabled her to confront this monster. He was convinced that she simply knew what to do. According to Mark, he and Pam began using illegal substances 5 years before these tragic events. He claimed that the addiction quickly took over subjecting them to a tumultuous cycle of attempting to recover and then falling back into addiction. They began to quarrel more frequently, and things spiraled out of control. Mark got into serious legal trouble, which only worsened over time. Meanwhile, Pam desperately sought to restore her normal life, distance herself from anything related to illegal activities. Ultimately, she filed for divorce, focused on overcoming her addiction. Pam got herself together and concentrated on her children. However, years earlier, Crystal had assumed the role of caretaker, as she was the eldest girl in the family. She recalled a time when her parents were dependent, how her father could sleep all day without regaining consciousness. As a result, she was forced to care for her younger siblings. Naturally, she also attended school. Despite her young age, the schoolgirl began to grasp the harsh realities of life. She became a reliable support for her mother, changed her sister's diapers, fed them, put them to bed, prepared for school in the mornings, and even cooked her own meals. By her own admission, Crystal felt like the unluckiest girl in her class, as others did not face such struggles. Crystal was never driven to or picked up from school, nor did she receive help. Of course, this situation seemed unjust. On the other hand, would she have been able to ask for help if not for the independence forced upon her in her early years? According to her sisters, during that time, Crystal took on the responsibilities of both her mother and father, with many not even knowing what her parents looked like because she shouldered almost all of the family responsibilities. Crystal remembered the moment her mother, Pam, decided to end it all. Pam managed to quit and gradually return to a normal life. However, from her recollections, her father remained entrenched in criminal circles. He could not quit, and many believed he didn't even try. By Mark's own admission, he couldn't stop using and selling banned substance, finding himself drawn into criminal schemes, fearing that leaving that lifestyle would be a dangerous decision. After Pam and the children moved out, Mark was arrested a few months later. Pam felt relieved to have left him, as staying with him might have jeopardized her dreams of a new life. He ended up in jail because of his criminal connections. His daughters was so angry with him that she simply stopped answering his calls, blaming him for choosing illegal substances over family. Mark he learned about the attack on his daughter. At that moment, he was behind bars and could not help her in any way. At the time of the attack, Mark was serving a sentence for the sale and possession of illegal substances. He was in prison for about 3 months. Suddenly, At 10 a.m., an unexpected visit occurred, as it was outside the permitted visiting hours. The matter was urgent. His mother and sister came to inform him about what had happened to Crystal. Emotions ran high. If he had not been incarcerated, he would have torn Tommy apart with his own hands. Naturally, this didn't change much. Mark couldn't change anything, not even be present in court to support his daughter. But at that moment, something shifted in him. He rethought his life, which had brought his daughter to that house on that fateful night. If it weren't for his problems, no one would have attacked Crystal. Meanwhile, there was one main issue to be resolved: determining what punishment the serial killer would receive for the murder of Katie and the attempted murder of Crystal. Pam had wanted the death penalty for the attacker from the very beginning. Crystal initially supported this decision, but gradually she concluded that she did not want to become like that creature who thirsted for blood. She advocated for a life sentence instead. However, compared to crimes, the prosecutor's office demanded the death penalty. The jury supported this initiative. In the end, Tommy was sentenced to death. The court believed that this would allow him to atone not only for Katie and Crystal but for all of his other victims. He eluded authorities for 20 years and was finally stopped thanks to a brave schoolgirl. Tommy Lynn Sells was born in Oakland, California, on June 28, 1964, one of 5 children of a single mother. He hardly knew his father. Tommy's sister fell ill and died when she was only 1.5 years old. After that, he was sent to live with his aunt, where he behaved poorly. He was returned to his mother, who did not want him. By the age of 7, Tommy had begun to drink alcohol and soon became the victim of abuse by an adult man. From the age of 10, he became addicted to banned substance and troubled his grandmother. All family members began to fear him, eventually kicked him out of the house. From the age of 14, Tommy began to wander. When he was 17, he found his mother and began to molest her in the shower. He was placed in a psychiatric clinic, where he was diagnosed with several disorders, including bipolar disorder. However, the treatment did not help. His condition worsened due to alcohol and substance abuse. According to Tommy, he committed his first murder at 15, on July 5, 1979, in Port Gibson, Mississippi, when he shot and killed 39-year-old John Kay during a home invasion. Witnesses described a suspect who resembled Tommy. The violence escalated from there. The next attack occurred on April 27, 1982, in St. Louis, Missouri, when 35-year-old Joanne Tate, 35, was abused and murdered in her home. Notably, another man had already been convicted and was serving time for this crime, but he was later exonerated. Tommy committed several murders of single mothers with children, breaking into their homes at night, kidnapping the children from their homes, abusing, and killing them in various ways. The style of each crime was different, so detectives did not see a connection between the attacks. The criminal did not spare anyone, even small children. Sometimes he would meet a future victim, gain her trust, enter her house, then kill her and her children. Tommy's most horrific murder was the attack on the Dardine family, where he killed 4 people at once. On November 17, 1987, while hitchhiking, he was picked up by 29-year-old Keith Dardine, who kindly brought him home for dinner. But instead of gratitude, Tommy shot Keith and then beat his 3-year-old son to death. He then proceeded to assault the pregnant wife of the homeowner, who gave birth to a baby girl during the attack. He killed both the wife and the newborn. Tommy's last known crime was the attack on Kathy and Crystal. For some of the 22 established murders, he received life sentences in various states. For others, he was never convicted, believing that the death penalty would suffice. Despite the fact that Crystal had defeated a serial killer, she had mixed feelings. She did not feel joy at the upcoming execution of Tommy, as she had never been the kind of person who indulged in such things, no matter who the perpetrator was. However, she did not challenge the verdict. Now, Crystal faced a much harder and longer struggle. Her parents were confident that she would cope with the consequences of the attack. Her mother and sisters rallied around her, even sleeping together in the same bed to provide support. Unfortunately, this did not always allow Crystal to rest fully. At times, she could spend an entire night without blinking, staring at the closed window of her room. By her own admission, during such moments, she thought about her escape routes in case of an attack. If the criminal entered through that window, she knew to run out through the other one. And if he entered through the door, she also knew how to hide quickly. In addition, it was important for Crystal to know that her loved ones were nearby. The girl felt reassured simply by the fact that her mother and sisters were alive and breathing. She could sense it. Gradually, Crystal began to regain her sense of self. Her father, Mark, spent 3 years behind bars. When he was released, he immediately sought to improve his relationship with his daughter, who had miraculously survived the attack of a serial killer. He understood that she needed support and help. She saw her father on the right path, even attending her graduation. However, Crystal felt that the relationship with her father was still a struggle. Their relationship continued to improve gradually, and both looked at it positively. Crystal was in a mentally difficult situation. It was not easy for her to feel joy despite an unconditional victory while her friend had died. Gradually, she returned to her usual life and became like a mother to the younger members of the family. Later, she spoke repeatedly with journalists, sharing that she cannot psychologically develop trust in people. Because of this, she has difficulties with relationships, although she genuinely wants to build a family. Nevertheless, Crystal still believes in the best. She even saw her father cope, quit crime and addiction, gradually make up for lost time. She is now 35 years old. Crystal is close to her family and constantly remembers her friend who was killed before her eyes. The events of that terrible night remain etched in her memory. Little is known about her personal life at the moment. On January 3, 2014, a judge set Tommy's execution date. The death sentence by lethal injection was carried out on April 3, 2014, at the Texas State Penitentiary in Huntsville. Crystal and members of the Harris family were present at the execution.